I know that there are things out there that have the word Catholic and feminism is in the name of these groups.
The hard part is that it's kind of everywhere. It's been really accepted as just sort of the way in which womanhood needs to move forward. And again, I think it's a sort of feminist light. And I don't mean to imply that any of them are ill-intended. That's not it's just the ideas themselves. I think people don't really realize what they're dabbling in. 30 years now, we've been trying to blend these two. Look what has happened to women in the church. What's happened to Catholic women? How many Catholic women are aborting and contracepting? It's almost the exact same as the popular culture. We got to get a picture with you with this flask.
With your flask. Well, it's in the show now.
Yeah. You'll tell us when we're on?
Yeah, you're good.
Carrie Gress, thank you for coming back onto my show.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to be back here.
Yeah. Explain that.
Oh, this is my flask. My husband got this for me for Christmas last year.
But why do you travel with it? I mean...
Oh, well, I don't. I just brought it here because I thought this is the place, if I'm going to use it.
That's so funny. I could fill it up with whiskey for you.
I think you should.
And you could... All right. You may be joking, but I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Sure. This is wild. I can't believe this has happened. This has never happened before.
See, that's why I brought it, because I was like,
no one has ever come to the studio
do something fun
and
with
given
this
me a flask. All right, let's see. I'm going to drop this all over the desk.
And it didn't help when you told me that the studio was going to be cold. I was like, I've got to bring something to stay warm.
So. This is amazing.
But yeah, there just wasn't enough time for me to get. You did it. It's a little tipple in there.
So... Are you a big boozer? Is that the... What's the...
I'm not a big boozer. I just, we like nice things. And it's always good to be prepared. Actually, that's the real truth. I really like being prepared.
Yeah.
And this is just felt like every woman needs a flask. You just never know, especially in winter, right? So,
I don't know.
So it's got our star logo.
I try not to speak for women, you know.
Theology of Home star logo on it. And it's really special. Thank you for filling up.
You're welcome. I hope you swig from that at some point.
I will.
You got to. So yeah, just to kind of recap for those who are new, or maybe those who did catch our last discussion. I think it was about a year ago you were on the show.
Are you?
Yeah. Karen is your name, right?
Exactly.
Carrie Gress. Why don't you tell people who you are?
Who am I? So I am a mother of 5 children, and I have written 10 books. The most recent book is The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. And that came out last fall, so that's mainly what we were talking about last year. And the whole idea is really just, how do we look at feminism and what it's done to the culture, and how do we start helping women in a way that's actually really helpful to them and not something that is leading them astray. And I think, initially I thought feminism could be...
salvaged?
We could salvage something. Yeah. I totally thought there was something salvageable.
And was it a research project you were doing? Is that how it came about?
Yeah. So I wrote the book, The Anti-Mary Exposed. And actually that book came about because Hillary Clinton was running for president. And I was writing the book, The Marian Option. And as I'm doing all this research for The Marian Option, I'm realizing Lady has the title of the most powerful woman in the world. And suddenly it occurred to me, what if Hillary Clinton wins? She will be the most powerful woman in the world, really. And, vying Our Lady. But she's nothing like Our Lady. She's totally opposite of Our Lady. And so I just started looking at elite women and kind of seeing this pattern. Like, not only is she like slightly different than Mary, but she's like totally, anti-Mary. And that's, I think, what I started researching back in the... I actually have a chapter in The Marian Option called Are We in the Age of Mary or the Anti-Mary? And that was what Tan Books was the publisher, and they said, can you write a whole book on this idea? And that's really what led to the Anti-Mary Exposed. And so I only went back to the 1960s. I thought I stopped there. I just thought, I've got a ton of research. I don't need to go back any earlier. And I'd always been told, the first wave of feminism was good. So I just wasn't too concerned about it. I just thought, okay, this is really the tipping point when feminism went sideways, and that's all I need to cover. And so then I was going to write another book. People had said, can you write something that's for secular women or Protestant women? Because obviously the Marian theme is a little bit of an obstacle for a lot of people. And so I started writing this book, and I knew it was going to be a secular book, and it ended up, Regnery was going to publish it, Regnery Publishing. And the book, I just thought I got to go back and look at first wave feminism. I bet I'll find some nice quotes, some really lovely things, edifying pieces that came from this sort of founding mothers of feminism. And when I got into it, I was just shocked. Like, what is this stuff? Like, and why has nobody done a forensic analysis of this to see what women were doing, what they were up to? And so anyway, that's really the book was starting with the earliest feminists, really the grandmother of feminism, Mary Wollstonecraft, and then moving up through the whole suffrage movement, and then really even seeing the early connection with communism. And anyway, we can certainly go into all those details a lot more, because I think we covered some of it the last time. But the more I've dug into it, even this last year, I've kept digging. And because there's so many different women that wrote, there were so many different movements, so many different things going on, and I was just dotting I's and crossing T's and making sure did I really get this right? And the deeper I go, the more remarkable it gets, and the worse it gets. And I'm also triangulating with a lot more other women who are scholars who are doing this kind of research, and their work is interlocking with mine. And there's one woman in Argentina who apparently has letters between one of the suffrage women in England and Stalin, Joseph Stalin. And this woman, the Pankhurst mother and daughter team that are kind of given credit for suffrage in England, they used all these just vile tactics to get their way, destroying businesses, burning down buildings, whatever they needed to do, including even things like hunger strikes when they were put in jail. And then, of course, it's really bad press to try and feed a woman when she's on a hunger strike in jail. So people didn't do that. So they had to let the women. I mean, it was just incredibly vile, all the things that they did. And so anyway, I think it's a story that's finally getting out. People are finally beginning to realize that the First Wave was not some pristine movement that was only focused on suffrage, but in fact had really deep and dubious tentacles that were attached to a lot of the things that ended up becoming the socialist movement, and then later the communist movement. And, all these trends were really interlocking together and are built on those really same bad roots and principles.
I think that 80% of people who watch this show are fully ready to condemn feminism. I suspect that there are some people, though, who have been maybe rightly aghast at some of the manosphere stuff, maybe even in the kind of atheistic manosphere sections online, that they think, okay, just at a time where this legitimately toxic masculinity, and by toxic masculinity, I mean a toxic lack of masculinity, like a man who acts like a brute and a tyrant towards women shouldn't be called masculine, actually. He might be able to be called effeminate, but not masculine. But I could see women saying, okay, at a time like this, when we're seeing the rise of the Andrew Tates, now's the time for like you, who should be on our side, to attack feminism. Yeah. And like I told you last time, my wife and I, like we changed. It's nice to have an answer to the question, what's an opinion you've changed your mind on recently? Because we all like to think we're open-minded, but I'm not sure if I am. Right. But my wife and I read your book, and we're like, oh, we think feminism is evil, root and branch now. There's nuance there, of course, like why did it arise? But wow, that's interesting. We never would have thought that, because, prior to reading that book, I was conflicted about how I felt. I didn't want to just get rid of feminism altogether, because I thought feminism meant, the movement that helps women. And if there was a name for helping children, and you were against that ism, you could see why people were like, why are you horrible? What's wrong with you? Why do you hate children? Yeah, right. And here's how I've come to think of it, and I'd love you to help me. I think that, and I'll just say the atheist and the Christian, even though there's a big spectrum here. I think the atheist looks at woman, sees her vulnerabilities, and assumes it is a weakness that needs to be rectified. The Christian sees the woman's vulnerabilities as her appropriate, right? And therefore nothing needs to be rectified. Just like a child. Like if you were to look at a child and go, we need to make them as strong as men. You're like, well, they might be one day, but what do you mean? Because they're supposed to be weaker. So yes, women are weaker. If they weren't weaker, we wouldn't need feminism. But this weakness is actually vulnerability, and that vulnerability is part of the feminine beauty and genius.
Right. It's not a bad thing.
Do you think that's right? Or did I-
So I think there's about three different things there. The first thing I would start by saying, because I want to talk about the manosphere stuff for sure, because I think that's hugely important. The feminism, I think, a very simple definition is feminism is about separating women from husbands and children so that they can be independent. And that, if you look back at what Mary Wollstonecraft was writing, that's one of her points was, we don't know what womanhood looks like because they've always been busy with these husbands and children. Like that's what they've been occupied with. We don't even know what they can do. And, 100 years later, you've got this woman named Emma Goldman who says the exact same thing. In the early 1910s, she was this Russian immigrant. She says the exact same thing. So, and the fascinating piece that is actually not well connected in my book because it didn't really jump out at me all that well initially, was that most of the suffragette women were all also involved in the abolition movement, which obviously we know slavery was a bad thing. And I think, I'm not in any way endorsing slavery. But what's fascinating is that they viewed the family as a kind of slavery, that women were enslaved to their husbands. They couldn't separate out, okay, one is a really abhorrent practice that's just gone on for so long and needs to end. The other is the basic cell of civilization and the place in which people grow and flourish. And they didn't have, like we have now, we have 50 years of seeing this, what a disaster that whole experiment has been of, the methodology, the methods with which they've used to promote feminism. We just didn't know, they didn't know how bad it was. They still had this belief that if we could have this all-female society, it would go well. The woman that wrote Wonder Woman, the concept for that, she wrote there was a woman in the early 1910s that wrote a book called Her Land that was all about this, how, civilization would just be so amazing without men. So the fundamental idea, this is the problem, is feminism is morphed. It's, it's a shapeshifter. It can kind of take on whatever it wants. Even just the Barbie film was amazing to watch because it's just repackaged in something pink, which, of course, the feminism I grew up with would be, what are you talking about? Barbie and feminism, these just don't go together. So I think that's the hard part, is that we've been told it's something good for women, and that's all. And we don't really get the underbelly of actually it's hugely anti-Christian because it's fundamentally about power, and Christianity is about surrender. So those, right there, you can tell these two are not going to blend well. So I think that's a really important distinction to make. And that even looking at, fast forward to the 1960s, what are these women promoting? There's a book called The Sisterhood is Powerful, which became kind of like a Bible for women in feminism. It was, this woman named Robin Morgan put together all these essays, and it's like this handbook for feminism. Well, in it, it's awful. Like, it promotes the idea of killing men, certainly abortion, and all of the fertility issues are at play. This also has spells in the back of it. It's sort of a handy thing. Like, if you need everyday spells, they're in the back of them. I mean, the cult element is really alive and well. So I think if you see just how bad the movement was and what it has led to, what the fruit has been from it, it's really interesting then to go look at the manosphere, because they're mere opposites. They're still like, we will dominate you. We think we're superior. We're going to crush you. We're going to humiliate you. That it's kind of the same thing. So
polar opposite.
Yeah. One is women and one is men. And, it's surprising that it actually took as long as it did for that kind of movement to appear. And actually, it was really funny. At some point, there was a review of my book, and someone actually compared me to Andrew Tate and said that what I was doing was like Andrew Tate. But it's kind of amazing if you think about it, because, the woman that wrote it wouldn't consider herself a radical feminist. And I probably agree on a lot of things. But for her to compare me with Andrew Tate is pretty amazing, when she's still bearing the name feminist, when we know how bad feminism has actually been. We know it's responsible for, it's the engine behind abortion. We know that it's driving divorce. We also know women are not happier because of feminism, because when you try to fundamentally tell a being to do something that isn't in accord with their nature, then they're not going to be happy. So
That's interesting. It's sort of like saying, okay, we don't even know what this flower is because it's been in this pot of soil receiving water.
Right.
So we need to take it out of the soil and then we'll know what it is.
then that's exactly what they wanted. And that's the thread that I think you can see all the way through it is what does our life look like without men or children? And that's the independence. That's the core nut that they're looking for. And it's just echoing throughout. And it's gotten to the point too where I'm amazed. It's now a very socially acceptable answer to say, well, we're not going to have children because we're just too selfish. People have gotten to that stage where they can actually say that. I think is really striking to me and shows just how far that idea of independence and your life is going to be a lot better without children and all of that. So in any event, I think it's going to take a while for people to really start understanding that feminism hasn't been good for women. And by and large, because we've just been told our whole lives that it's good for women. It's just sort of goes without saying. The media has been promoting this. Elite women have been promoting this. It's all that women really hear. And so there's a few of us.
Confident woman. Yeah.
All of that. I'm empowered. So anyway, I see the two as the opposite sides of the coin. And I think it's really hard, especially in the church, because of the fact that women are still grasping on to this notion of feminism as something that's good. I've actually started referring to it as feminism light because I think they obviously reject the occult piece. And there's three ways that feminism is a method. And my husband actually came up with a really great way to understand it, which I'd never thought about before. I'd always struggled with, why are there always these three things together? It's always the occult, it's always free love, and it's always smash the patriarchy since almost the very beginning. And he was helping me with a talk, and he's like, there's got to be an easier way to remember this. And then he said, the reality is it's each of those things is attacking one aspect of the Trinity. And as soon as he said that, I was like, this is why it's all three. You're attacking the patriarchy, which is the image of the Father. You're attacking the body or the temple of the Holy Spirit with the free love aspect. And then the occult is the attack on the authority of Jesus Christ in the world. So anyway, it's a pretty tidy package when you see all of those things, come together over and over again throughout 200 years of a movement. They're all there. So feminist light don't ascribe to all, obviously they're not going to ascribe to the occult piece if they're trying to blend it with Catholicism, but they will focus a lot on the patriarchy piece. And I think that is just always really puzzled me. Like, how do you explain the church and the Pope and the papacy and the all-male clergy?
Patriarchs in Scripture.
Right, all of that. I think it's just a real challenge to really come out in a way that makes sense to people and is tidy. I think the other piece of feminism that is really a fruit of communism and socialism is just the idol that work has become. And I think that's another part of sort of feminist light is this idol of that we really will figure out who it is that we're meant to be once we're working.
Scraping plaque off the teeth of strangers instead of caring for our children.
There's that.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I think it, maybe less so today, but when I got married back in 2006, let's say I was sitting down with the priest and we were doing classes, and I said, well, obviously, I want you to stay home and look after our children and take care of our home, and I want to provide for us. There'd be a lot of priests that would kind of recoil. I'm not blaming priests. I'm just saying that it just, you can't even say something as simple and as natural as that without people recoiling. I think what's difficult about your job and what you're trying to accomplish is if you were trying to show the world that abortion was evil, you could say, well, abortion is the intentional killing of the unborn. We shouldn't kill the unborn. There's no justifying reason. But what you're trying to attack is an ideology which, as you say, shapeshifts and morphs. So when you say feminism, you don't have any idea what people are hearing.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So when you sit across from, I don't know if you do this, but let's say you were to sit across from a feminist and they self-proclaim feminist. I mean, how do you begin to help them critique this worldview? How do you even begin to define the worldview?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the big challenge is the shape shifting, the other huge challenge is just the fact that we don't have reason in the culture anymore. That, as someone who spent years getting a PhD in philosophy to then come to the realization that it doesn't matter. I think that you're actually not making an argument that anybody's really going to be able to hear, I think is challenging. So I think the real way in which, obviously there's my book. You can go through the whole study of it, and it's not, it's not a soundbite. That's the other challenge is I think we're so used to trying to argue with people in sound bites. And, the only thing that you really got in terms of easy sound bites are like, well, what has it done to women? Women aren't happy. The culture isn't happy. We're in this huge birth dearth, which civilizationally is a disaster. You can come at somebody with those kinds of things. But I think it usually goes back more to just getting to know the woman and what it is that she's going through. I got an amazing letter last year from a woman who had, she bought into all of it. She got into drugs. She got, there's all kinds of rape and abuse and things that she was going through, and really tough situation. And someone gave her my book, and she was trying to come back to the church. Someone gave her my book, and she was like, finally, someone sees the pain that I'm in. It was a really remarkable response. So instead of rejecting it, she realized, this is why I'm in pain. Somebody finally is telling me, this is why you hurt so much, because this is what civilization, this is what the elite in our culture have let happen to you over and over again, and told you this was good, told you this was freedom, told you this was empowerment. And, she's just this miserable woman trying to have some kind of a life and, put it together.
We all see that. It's as clear as the nose on our faces. You see this dear woman with jeans ripped beyond recognition, bright blue hair, tats, like they, them pin on. Yeah. They just look like they want to kill themselves. They look brutally, awfully miserable, solipsistic, uninterested in everybody around them, Yeah. And then you couple that with an experience I had recently. I was in a Whole Foods and I was just eating lunch there, and I saw this lovely woman in a dress looking just beautiful with like 5 kids around her. Right. And the kids were dressed well, and she looked happy, and she even had a flip phone. I'm like, oh, there's no way this woman is not a Christian,
right? Absolutely.
Or a Mormon. Like she's one of them. She's happy. There's no way this woman's not happy. So how is it we can like look at her and go, oh, what a poor soul? Yeah. And then look at the blue hair. Now, okay, nothing intrinsically wrong with blue hair. I don't think there's anything good about it. I'm not condemning you if you've got the blue hair, but it seems to be a sign of rebellion against nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
To make myself look unhuman in a way, kind of anime-ish. Yeah. There's something in that.
Well, I think all of it points to just incredible discontent. And this is really the currency that feminism has lived off of. Even from the 1890s, I found this, we're going to stir up this gospel of discontent in women's hearts. And because what happens when women are discontent? They're angry. They're mad. They're active. They're activated. They're manipulatable. And this is what feminism has done over and over and over again.
Do you remember that line from Matt Walsh? So I got to turn this on. Remember Matt Walsh's line? Not Matt Walsh. He was in that woman's parade. If you're not here for women, we ask you to leave. What is that? Do you remember?
I think that's... So I think it comes down to when you're dealing with a woman and, in the feminism issue, there's usually something broken somewhere in the story. There's something, and it's not, and this is the thing, is it's self-replicating. It has its own kind of DNA in it, if you will, where
interesting,
you've got, broken people break other people. So women get these ideas, it's like the girl that goes to college, and she goes to college like a normal person, and then she's coming home at Christmas and she's got male pronouns, there's something has happened. Interesting. And the ideas have changed. And then she goes all in, whether it's the drugs, the abuse, the promiscuity, and it just keeps moving. It just keeps going. And this is the amazing thing, is how much it it reproduces itself.
My friend John Henry says that God will forgive, nature will not, right? So if you've been promiscuous your whole life and then you go into marriage, God will forgive you, but you will bear those wounds forever.
Yeah.
You've really damaged yourself in a way that you actually won't be able to find full restoration from. You'll be able to find a certain amount of healing, but you got to deal with that, right?
Yep.
And it kind of makes me think of like how Disney started going woke and their profits started plummeting.
Yeah.
And rather than going, oh, like
made a
this was
mistake,
bad,
right.
they just doubled down and just kept plummeting. And it's
Yeah.
like that. It's like
That's
nature keeps hitting you in the face.
Right.
And the solution feminism gives you is to hit yourself in the face harder.
Yeah, and keep going with that. And then hit the children that you bear, if you have children, hit them with it. And that's, I've also done a lot of research. I've started talking to a woman named Hannah Speer, who is a psychiatrist in Switzerland. She's actually originally from Norway. She's Jewish and just a lovely woman. And she's worked on these wards with women with deep anxiety, deep depression. You know, they all are living this sort of feminism dream. And she's realized that all these women none of them were attached properly to a parent, to a mother. And she ends up becoming something of a surrogate for them because they just need that emotional attachment to a woman who cares for them and loves them. And so that's the other way in which it perpetuates itself, because women who become narcissistic and so focused on themselves because of this brokenness are just going to pass that down through generations. And she said, the problem too is that there's not really any way that she said there's one way to help cure them, short of like having them adopted by somebody or something. And that's to find a man who is very low on the neurotic scale, and for them to have children and to have kids, and for him to be solid and steady and stable, and for her to become a mother. And that's really, and she said it's really interesting because all these things are clinically, diagnosed as a mental illness, but then it goes away when they get married and have a child,
right?
When they're actually loved.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that the very thing that women are told they should not have is actually the cure that they need is a stable man and be loved unconditionally by children and love their children too. So
okay, let's define feminism, even though as you say it's a amorphous thing, and feminism is the idea that
feminism is the idea that women are better off without husbands and children. Fundamentally, there's a lot more that goes into that definition, but that's what it is.
I see what you're saying now when you say that the manosphere is the opposite, because the manosphere is the idea that men are better off without marriage and children.
Yeah.
So we'll sleep around,
Yeah.
And if we're going to get married, we're going to get married when we're like in our 50s, and
right.
she can't take anything from me. And
and that
interesting.
It's exact.
Wow.
Mirror. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So one created the other. Yeah.
Yeah. And once you realize just how important marriage is, I mean, the Bible begins and ends with one.
Yeah.
It's the fundamental building block of society.
Right.
And not only is it the place from which society springs, it's the place to which society aspires. It's everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the thing that feminism and the manosphere are against.
Totally against.
How demonic is that?
Yeah.
And I want to be clear, when I say manosphere, I'm not talking about men who are rightly attacking feminism, nor am I talking about women who would identify as feminist, who I would disagree with on many things, perhaps who would attack a man who wants to just sleep around without being committed. Although I'm not sure if you see many feminists doing that, but
Yeah.
That really put it in a nutshell for me, I think.
Yeah. And therefore it makes it really easy to then sort of figure out what the solution is, which it's that narrow, like avoid the extremes and figure out how a couple works together. It almost feels like I've started looking at this debate as like a really bad divorce going on. Like there's people on this side who are like supporting just the husband, and then there's this side that are supporting just the wife. And there's no way to, like, nobody really wants to bring healing. Everybody just wants it to be further exacerbated because they have their own agenda and they actually get a lot out of it.
How could this not be? I mean, I know what you mean. Like feminism far predates the sexual revolution. All right, I know. It might go back to Eden. But the point is, I mean, how could the sexual revolution not lead to this? How could it not?
Yeah.
Men hating women and children, and women hating men and children.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
And us all deciding we're pissed off and angry and then blaming each other for it.
Yeah.
Wild.
Isn't that nice? Oh, we've created.
Golly.
Yeah. So we absolutely have our work cut out for us. I know I was on Dennis Prager's show at one point, and he was talking about when the sexual revolution happened. And he was saying, this was just, he was in college at the time. And he said, this was just amazing. The thing that men had wanted for 6,000 years, finally, you could just sleep with whomever you wanted to. And, it was, so it was really interesting to hear his perspective on it. But it's amazing, it's that back to that nature. It's going to come around and bite you. This isn't pain-free. There's going to, nature is going to win. And I think that's one of the interesting things. You hear a lot about women griping about men today. And you have to look back at the sexual revolution and say, well, who's the one that changed the most? Well, it was this free love idea that's what changed. The women changed the most. And so I think that's how it started. And I think that's really how it's going to have to end, is getting back to this idea of women understanding the importance of monogamy, and that this has not been good for women and it hasn't been good for men. And, monogamy is really the only way out of it in terms of restoring and rebuilding, because
a lot of people have noticed that there seems to be, at least online, which I guess is a reflection of the world, this increase in conservative men and leftist women. What is that?
Well, actually, I want to ask you about that, because I'm kind of fascinated by it, because Dennis Prager was like all in on the sexual revolution in terms of what he was talking about, and at that stage in his life. But you can see, you've mentioned sort of this idea of men simping to women. Is that the right word?
Yeah, I'd be happy to express that, because I feel like whenever I do, everyone misunderstands me. So to say it to a woman and you mirror it back to me would be helpful.
Right. But I think the bigger question that I'm really interested in, anyway, you explain that concept first.
I said it within the context of marriage.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
So you begin with this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Happy wife, happy life is a thing that people say about immature, bratty women, in a way. It's like I need to placate her so my life doesn't become hell.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it's saying, right? And so when I said that men can simp for their wives, what I meant by that is they can be overly submissive and passive, whatever it takes for them to win her affection, even if her physical affection.
Yeah.
In other words, if I rock the boat, I might not get sex.
Right. Yeah.
So men can instead of being the leaders, like clearly a leader is going to at times have to say tough things with great love and tenderness, of course.
Right.
But if the man is weak and wants only like sexual pleasure, that's his highest goal, and it's not leading his family to heaven, then he's going to bend over backwards to make her like him. Right. Do you see?
No, I agree, and I think it's really interesting. And I would bracket that out between men in terms of married men, and then I also want to talk about the men that are not married to women, but that are worried that there'll be revenge or manipulation or something like that. So I want to talk about that in a second. But I'm what's interesting about the question is the conservative young men, is it porn that's given them the freedom that they no longer have to pursue women, and so therefore they have a kind of freedom emotionally from women that men in prior generations didn't have? Like, I mean, it's a very dark way of looking at it, but I'm curious to know, like, is that, I don't think that's the only thing going on, and it's, it sounds really negative, but I think that there's got to be an element of that if relationship building isn't really, and dating isn't really what it used to be anymore.
Pornography is so fascinating to me. I've always been really fascinated by the concept and, the definition and how we interact with it and things like this. I could speak about it forever, but one thing that's for sure is that pornography, the reason we get hooked on pornography is not for the orgasm. It's the same, like the man who gets hooked on gambling, it's not for the money.
Right.
And you say that and that sounds silly. Like, of course it's for the money. That's why he's gambling at it.
Right.
And you go, yeah, but if you gave him $100,000 or $1 million, would he stop gambling? Well, no.
Right.
And I think so pornography is sort of like that as well, right? It's like, it's not even really about the climax. It's about the constant titillation, the novelty and things like this. So I don't think a man can be satisfied with it. I think certainly he uses it and then maybe finds his real life experiences, if he's fornicating, fall short of it because it involves kind of embarrassment and another human being with her own pores and her own breasts. Like she's just normal, like you, wretched like you are. So yeah, I'm old. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't know what young people are going through today. So I think it might be a combination of pornography, although I do see, which is really interesting, like in this manosphere, the type that I would criticize, I see like a rejection of pornography in that as well, which is wild.
That is wild.
You know, like I see this like how embarrassing. Like this is behavior that would make a chimp blush. Yeah. Here you are masturbating to your laptop. Like this is not masculine.
Right.
So I don't know if it's a combination of that and how are men and women interacting today?
I do think there's...
Like I'm old, but I'm not like so. But I guess what I mean is technology has advanced so quickly in such a short
it's
span.
hard to tell what's
like
going
I got
on.
my first, like I remember the iTouch and that came out in, I was about 2008 or something.
iPod.
No, iTouch. It was called an iTouch. Look it up. It was an iTouch. And it came out, obviously there was the iPod, but then the iTouch came out, which was this without the phone, right? And look it up. I want you to know that I'm right. I was right. You're welcome.
No, it was the...
All right, we'll split it down the middle. We were both right. And getting him ready for marriage. Yeah. So you know, like, I don't know, like how did I meet people? Like I'm 41. I met people at parties. I met, you know... So I can't imagine what it's like where your first sexual experience is pornography and then you're also kind of looking at each other on Facebook and, oh, God. I don't get it.
Josiah, did you want to weigh in on it?
Josiah, do you have a mic out there?
No, but I can come in there.
Yeah, you want to come in here and...
Weigh in.
What's the question?
The question is what's going on with young men, conservative young men. And I will say, and this actually is an important thing to talk about, feminism is like, people are done with it. Like there's a few sections where it's a last holdout, but for the most part, other than like, it's pretty much contained by boomer women, Gen X women, and all the younger women that I meet. I mean, especially Catholic women don't really want anything to do with it. So it's been an interesting thing to see.
So the question is like, what's going on with young men that's causing them to go to the manosphere?
No. The question is, why are young men becoming more conservative?
Oh, that's because...
And does it have anything to do with the fact that they don't need women the way, or their relationships aren't built the way that they used to be, where they're dating and they have to be more amiable?
I think it's actually the opposite. I think that what's happening is, so what you're saying is that it's the boomer women and the Gen Xers and like the elder millennials, women who are still hanging on to feminism. And they're hanging on to specifically and increasingly the man-hating version of feminism because they need to for, like as it dies out among younger women, especially younger women, the ones they really want, the ones who aren't likely to buy into it, don't buy into it. It becomes more man-hating. And those women are the ones holding on to it, but those are also the women running all of the bureaucratic organizations teaching youth in schools and in colleges and stuff. And so they become more conservative just as a reaction to being hated by the people who are supposed to be caring for them and teaching them. So they automatically go find something else, and they just find these online communities that are increasingly more conservative and increasingly conservative in more radical ways. And they get distilled down into these more extreme forms, right? Where like as the heat turns up from the outside world, the ones who are, you know, not as pure ideologically boil out. And so it's like distilling alcohol. It gets stronger and stronger and stronger.
Nice analogy. So that actually gives me a lot more hope, because I think I was looking at a very cynical point of view, but one of the things that I've seen is just how much those women have controlled everything. And so it's really heartening to hear that something else is breaking in and forming opinions in a different way.
I mean, it does end up being the manosphere stuff and the more extreme political stuff that's not great, but it is better than them being beaten down. You know, I'm inclined to say that while a lot of the things they're buying into are not good, it is better than them hating themselves. Because if you had an entire generation, I should say, because I think the latter half of Gen X and the former half of the millennial generation largely are the men are self-hating and weak. I think if you had another generation of that, society would be completely doomed. But I think it is better. This is maybe not great, but I think it's better for men to be in the manosphere following Andrew Tate than to be weak and self-hating. So, yep.
There you go. Thank you, Josiah.
And it is interesting, like when we were doing chastity talks back in the 90s and aughts, well, not the 90s for me, but you would hear those chastity talks and they very much centered on, not always, but it did kind of feel like men, come on, men,
Yeah.
please stop. Like, look at all these great women.
Right.
And even today you hear that.
Even
There's so many
today.
great single women.
Yeah.
And you're like, are they? Are they great?
Yeah.
Or do they have no interior life because they've destroyed it by binging on Netflix and doom scrolling TikTok? Like, what's left in a woman after she's done that for 10 years? So I think the answer is both men and women typically suck, and we should try to stop. But it seems that blaming each other isn't helping.
Obviously not helping at all. I think that's really one of the key things that has to come back is just the sense of we're made to be together. And, just the beauty of what happens when you see a couple living together with one goal and not, trying to dominate one another. And I think that's, one of the things that is with the manosphere and feminism, the idea is that someone dominates. And I think this is what women are reacting against, rightfully so, because you've got historical evidence, whenever there's sin, which means whenever there's people, there's going to be sin and there's going to be brokenness and abuse. The problem is that feminism actually, like I was saying earlier, it makes it worse. And so you end up without a sense of, I think what has happened is there's this confusion between power and purpose. So women look at men and think you have all the power without realizing actually the things that men do, which is provide, protect, and procreate. It's not about power. It's about a purpose and a mission. And I think, it goes back, and we can obviously dig in more into that, the idea of vulnerability. But women think that that purpose is more worthy than the purpose that women have. And I think that's why there's so much confusion that's been sown, is because of that conflation of power and purpose.
Okay. I'm asking my local supporters for questions because I forgot to do that earlier. Yeah. And like, men really want to provide strength. It's the same idea, this idea we had earlier of you take a flower out of a pot plant to see what it is and you're surprised that it dies. Like, men delight in having their strength received.
Yeah.
Like the man when a woman lets the man put the bag over the top in the airplane, because there's no way in hell she's able to do it, and it's embarrassing that she continues to try. He's actually so gratified by that, you know, and fair enough. Like, if this woman's had experiences with creepy men, maybe that's why she's like, I'm good. So I'm not faulting her for that. I'm just saying that, like, men, we just want our strength to be received. That's
recognized.
It's embarrassing how much we're made for it, even in small ways. Like even in my marriage, there are times that I'll be doing something kind of, I don't know, kind of stereotypically masculine. Like I was building a deck on our back property in Florida recently, and just like using power tools and shit, and to have my wife see me, and I just felt so good, and that's not me really. I don't really do a lot of that kind of stuff. So to be doing that, I felt like so gratified, and so, and I'm sure it's the same with women. Like you can only say like I don't like children, or I'm not really whatever. But I don't know. Is that right?
Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely right in the sense of just recognizing the gifts that men have, which we obviously haven't done. And
like what's a similar thing to women though? Like when a man says, I want my strength to be received.
It's absolutely.
If he says he doesn't, it's because he's terrified that he doesn't have what it takes.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
That's it.
Men
will not put themselves in situations where they will be exposed. We hate being exposed. So what is it with women?
It's usually beauty. It's not always beauty, but it's usually that. And I think that's just a fascinating aspect, is look at how much money women spend on being beautiful. It's, billions of dollars, plastic surgeries.
Yeah.
And you see women who are unhappy are what are they doing? They're making themselves not beautiful. I'm sure you've seen those like before and afters of the girl when she looks normal in high school and then she goes to,
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
It is. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And that's not even transitioning, on a biological level, but just the destruction that's involved in that. It's specifically attacking her beauty and her capacity to convey that. So I think that's probably one of the main things with women.
I want to tell you about Hallow, which is the #1 downloaded prayer app in the world. It's outstanding. Hallow.com/Matt Fradd. Sign up over there right now and you will get the first 3 months for free. That's like a lot of time. You can decide whether it's useful to you or not, whether it's helpful. If you don't like it, you can always quit. Hallow.com/Matt Fradd. I use it. My family uses it. It's fantastic. There are over 10,000 audio guided prayers, meditations, and music, including my lo-fi. Hallow has been downloaded over 15 million times in 150 different countries. It helps you pray, helps you meditate, helps you sleep better. It helps you build a daily routine and a habit of prayer. There's honestly so much excellent stuff on this app that it's difficult to get through it all. Just go check it out. Hallow.com/Matt Fradd. The link is in the description below. It even has an entire section for kids. So if you're a parent, you could play little Bible stories to them at night. It'll help them pray. Fantastic. Hallow.com/Matt Fradd. I have this idea that when you look at man movies and woman movies, they say so much about the heart of a man and a woman. Yeah. So movies that men typically love are movies about a man who rises to the occasion and fights for either a woman or a country and is victorious despite the battle and the struggle.
Right.
Here's what I say about women chick flicks.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's hear it.
The main character is always imperfect somehow. She's a nerd. She doesn't. She's kind of clumsy. Right. She is what every woman watching it is. If there is a perfect woman in the movie, she's the bitch.
Yep.
She's the enemy. The man in the chick flick sees past that clumsiness to her beauty,
right?
And that beauty is then revealed.
Yeah,
that's is that not most chick flicks in some way, or And
her potential is drawn out because she's loved. Yeah, no, that's the Hallmark movie script. It's the girl that goes home. She's got to have some kind of a cause, and she's like saving the library or something. But she falls in love with the
laid back guy who has the vegetable stall, and she's like a high New York power something.
Yeah. She's in her power suit and all of that. She doesn't really know how to relate to him in his truck and can't get into it properly. But then that's exactly it. I think that's
beautiful.
And I think that really does point to, and I talk about this in the Anti-Mary Exposed, is the desires of a woman's heart. And, the Marian aspect, I think we think of beauty in a cheap way, in a very, almost as a caricature of what it is meant to be. But that was one of the fun things about doing all the research about Our Lady, was just how much people, to every apparition, she was the most beautiful woman you've ever seen. Our Saint Therese of Lisieux said she was so beautiful you would want to die just so you could see her again, which, it's hard to imagine that kind of beauty. But her beauty isn't vanity. Her beauty is pointing to
Botox or
there's like Botox, Mary, like that's it's not a thing, right? Yeah. So I think that's what it points to, something deeper, that a woman has a desire to be beautiful, but the beauty that she needs to cultivate is interior beauty, because the interior beauty, we all can think of women that are maybe not very physically attractive, but they've got this interior something that you're like
100%.
Yeah, that's 100%. So much more compelling.
There've been times in my life where I've seen women in a photograph or something and didn't think they were that attractive, and then I got to know them. And I'm like, oh, wow, like I actually find you physically attractive now, which is strange because you don't even look different than the photo. It's not like you look different in person, but
something came out.
Something beautiful,
Yeah. And that's really the tragedy, I think, of what we have lost so much of by all of it. Just the models that we have for womanhood are just a disaster. And this is, Noelle Marian and I have worked arduously to sort of try to help women get a real model of what womanhood is again in Theology of Home, like to just have the mental hooks so that you can imagine what does a great woman look like, because there was a study that was done on men, like what does a good man look like, and men around the world were asked this question, and there was kind of a distinction between a real man and a good man.
Okay.
And the good man was, I mean, the real man sort of cut corners and, just went along to get along kind of thing. And the good man was one who was sacrificed for people. So there was kind of still this universal thing. But if I was to ask you, well, you've thought about it more than most people, but if we were to ask somebody on the street, like, what's a good woman? Or especially a good woman, what?
If I ask what is a good woman, I think they would say someone who's independent. That is 100% what they'd say.
Ambitious, empowered.
Yeah, empowered.
Leans in, right, all the things. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's what we have been
Wild.
literally groomed to believe about ourselves, that unless we're doing those things, we're not a good woman. That there's no other category for us to work with. But what's interesting too is, in addition to beauty, there's always that compassion piece. And this is, one of the ideas. I've just started Jordan Peterson's new book. I haven't gotten very deep in it at all, but he talks about this idea of misplaced compassion, and that's the original, really one of the original. I mean, he doesn't use this language, but the kernel of the sin of woman is to have misplaced compassion. So if you look at all of the social justice warriors, where's their compassion? It moves further and further away from you. It's not your child, it's not your husband. It keeps moving out further away to people that you don't know at all. And that I think is really interesting. Whereas the good woman, like
she's present.
She's present, she's holding,
wow.
It's in her heart, they're in her head. She's got real concrete people with real wounds and real sins and real flaws that she loves no matter what, even because of those.
That is it.
So I think that's...
with all these causes that we support to make us feel good, we're not connected to any of them. And that's kind of their appeal, because they make no claim on me except to look virtuous.
Yeah.
So it used to be the ozone layer, or it used to be whatever, but it's always something removed from me, nothing I have to do.
Or be engaged with to help solve it. I throw money at the problem, or maybe I picket, or, go to Women's March, my pink hat on, I mean, there's nothing, there's not a real person in front of you who's suffering that you're dealing with. You're dealing with sort of this intangible. And so anyway, I think it's just an amazing insight to start. I've never really thought about that.
Where did you get that insight from? Oh, Peterson.
Well, it's Peterson's. He doesn't, I don't know how much he goes into it. I haven't gotten into the book that deep, but it was an idea I had never connected. And, all this time I'm thinking about women was this misplaced compassion, and how that's the real problem. If you want to start being the good woman, you've got to start pulling it back into people that you actually know, and pour yourself into that in a real and present way instead of the abstraction.
What did Peterson say about you?
So Jordan Peterson liked my book. He said, actually it was, I had lunch with he and Tammy one afternoon in the summer, and they read my book together. So it was great.
Wow, what an honor.
Yeah, it was really fun. We had a great lunch. But yeah, he said that he thought that the work that I'm doing, and Janice Fiamingo, who's a really good friend of theirs, she's one of the other women that she's actually been doing this feminism stuff for a longer than I have. I just never ran across her work because it's all on YouTube, and she's done videos. And she was actually a professor, very much a feminist, and she was in the classroom and she was presenting some argument about feminism, and then it suddenly dawned on her, like, how did the men receive this? And that was a real changing point for her. It totally changed her perspective on it, and she started doing all this research into the first wave stuff. So she and I have a lot of interlocking ideas, and probably duplicate research in other areas where I've done things that she hasn't. So I need to sort of connect with her more. But anyway, so Jordan was saying that he thought that Janice and I were really doing the best.
But didn't you say that there was a word he used of you that you're like, I guess that's a compliment? Didn't you say
he
that
called me a beast.
She's a beast.
I think
thank you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's like, no, that wasn't that. bloody monster.
She's a bloody monster. Yeah, that sounds
You can
more
hear
like
him saying that, can't you?
Oh, yeah.
I know. I wasn't really sure what to think about that, but then, I realized it was high praise. So, yeah.
What do you, who are your critics? And I imagine in the Catholic space, you have critics, right, who want to really baptize the word feminism and are very upset with you probably that you're trying to demonize it. So what is, could you try to steel man their arguments? Like, what are they saying?
Yeah. No, I think, I love the idea of debating this. I love the idea of talking about this. I love the idea of getting my arguments stronger and finding, let's poke holes in this. I just don't love it when it doesn't feel like they're really real arguments, But one of them there've been a few of them, but one of the arguments was that I didn't think that women were rational, which is kind of a strange thing to say.
I have a PhD.
Yeah.
Wrote a thesis.
In philosophy. Yeah. I kind of think it's important. I've spent most of my adult life studying philosophy, but, it was that was one argument. The other stuff hinged on.
Why did they say that?
Well, I mean, the bigger issue is just the main argument that Catholic feminists have been making is that the first wave is good, and they've really hinged their arguments.
And what do they think the first wave is saying?
There's this desire, there's this belief that the first wave is trying to get to a feminism of care. Which is really a fascinating concept, that it's really, it's trying to help women who are broken. Lovely idea. Do you want the Kamala Harris answer? Or do you want a very long answer? Because I could give both, but.
Would you like to give?
I don't really want to do a Kamala Harris impression.
Then do the long one. Yeah.
So the fundamental problem is that a feminism of care, I think it can be effective if you sort of cherry pick ideas from women and you don't really realize, from the early feminists, and you don't really realize the whole context and the whole ethos in which they're making their arguments. And I think that's what's actually been going on, is sort of this creating of a vision of what first wave feminism was without really understanding what it is. And the problem is Mary Wollstonecraft is, again, back to that idea of, she's trying to figure out what womanhood is. And she's basing a lot of her ideas, first of all, on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, as well as Thomas Paine. So Wollstonecraft has this experience where she's a teacher, she's trying to help women, and then she moves to London. And it's basically like, again, that girl who goes to college and she's got these new professors and they're giving her all these ideas and she's just filled to the brim with them. So what happens is the French Revolution breaks out, and Edmund Burke, who is really considered the founder of conservatism, he basically says this is going to be an absolute disaster. It's going to end up in major bloodshed. And the reason why is because you're trying to get rid of tradition and faith. And nobody believes him at the time. Everybody thinks, Edmund Burke, you're nuts. This is never going to be that bad. They were worried it was going to spread to England. And so he was really outspoken about it. Well, Mary Wollstonecraft is actually responding to him. And there's a book written by a man named Yuval Levin called The Great Debate. And he basically goes back to this debate between Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine and says that's really where the split happens, where we've got liberalism and conservatism. This is the nut.
Yeah.
And so Wollstonecraft is fundamentally very much on the Thomas Paine side of things. And, they knew each other. They were on some committee together. She actually goes to Paris and is involved in, not in the killing, but she's watching the revolution. She knows where he lives. She calls him Tommy. This is one of the arguments was that they weren't connected, but they were very much connected. So what's fascinating is that from the very beginning, feminism isn't part of the, it's trying to get rid of tradition and faith. But those are and Burke knew this. You cannot have a culture of care without those pieces. Those are what create, that's the fabric that creates the capacity for people to care for each other, whether it's the family or whatnot. So juxtapose, you have these very different personalities, and she ends up, ends up having a relationship with an American. They tell the French embassy that they're married so that she doesn't get massacred in the French Revolution. She's pregnant. She moves back to England. She tries to commit suicide a few times because that's what the Romantics did. That was a very popular thing to do. And she ends up getting married to this man named William Godwin, who's actually very well known as far as being, his ideas really affected Marx, really influenced Marx. And he was actually much better known. He was just kind of this intellectual celebrity at the time. And so they get married and they have a baby. Well, she dies 10 days later from childbirth. So this is kind of tragically her life ends. Edmund Burke, meanwhile, he ends up taking in all these orphans from people who had been guillotined in Paris. He's, saw that there was a need for all these children. He had an estate. He creates an orphanage for all these children to be taken care of. Like, it's just a very different, like the ways in which their lives played out. Now, I'm obviously not trying to make some sort of judgment about Mary Wollstonecraft per se, but I'm just pointing out that these are very stark differences in their approaches. And there's, do you know Ian McGilchrist, his work? I don't think so. The Master and His Emissary. Anyway, he's a Scotsman, and he's just an absolute delight. He's written that. He wrote that book, I think, about 10 years ago, and it's actually a really mind-blowing book. But he, in that book, says, the French Revolution was supposed to be just and fraternal and ordered. Yeah. And it was none of those things. Right. And this is what...
It had nice language, didn't it? Mm-hmm. Fraternity, liberty.
Yeah, but then you've got, bishops hanging from lampposts and, the guillotine just nonstop and so much death and destruction. And, it was just a disaster. And that's what Edmund Burke saw, was this is what's going to happen, because he knew when you take out faith and tradition, all you've got left is a power vacuum, or a vacuum
for
power to fill. So this is why he was so prescient and knew exactly what was going to happen. So all of that is a long backstory to say feminism has been, because the fact it's trying to get rid of faith and family, there's no way in which it can create that which it wants to create, because you're removing all the context through which care can actually happen, where you can protect your daughters and your family and, protect women from abuse and all of those kinds of things. It's a family that's and the larger family community that is, the pieces have to be in place for that to actually happen. So it's a great concept, but it just doesn't work given the threads that our feminism is built with.
It reminds me of how the New Atheism, Christopher Hitchens and others, would think that once we abolish religion, there will be an ascendance of reason. Yeah. And now there are women with penises.
Yeah,
How did that happen?
Terribly reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Yeah. No.
Men can be pregnant? Like, that happened quickly. So it's like there's something similar there. Like, you remove the faith and you remove the tradition, and it turns out you're left with, babble.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this, as Ian McGilchrist would say, there's this grasping at ideas, but there's not enough context for the ideas to. It's the difference between what something is and how it becomes that which it is. Okay. One is very one-dimensional, and the other is very much understanding the nature of it, how it was created, and how it flourishes. But, back to your planted flower example, like it's and unfortunately, this is really the pattern of liberalism. Really, it's just we have these really great ideas, but we don't know how to achieve them because we don't understand the nature of it. So that's why things always end up so bloody and broke and such a disaster.
Didn't John Paul II talk about feminism? Didn't he speak about it positively?
Yeah.
This is a pushback I'm sure you get.
No, this is a great question. So this is the amazing thing. I had the impression that he talked about it all the time. I thought it was like peppered throughout his documents, and it's actually in one place. It's in Veritatis Splendor, and he uses it in kind of scare quotes, a new feminism, which, you can argue either way. Like, maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe he was just trying to sort of create a new word. I don't know. But the place he does not use it, which you would think he would use it, is in Mulieris Dignitatem. Like, if it's not in that document, he's not really using it. This isn't his thing, because it's nowhere in that document, the word feminism. So I think that, and that was actually one of the accusations, was that I wasn't sufficiently Catholic because I wasn't going along with John Paul II on.
Interesting. So one place.
It's in
You've
one,
looked
it's in
into
one
this.
place.
One place.
One place.
And even
yeah,
there
I was
it says
shocked.
scare
Like,
quotes. And what was
yeah.
the context in which you used it? Do you know?
It was just, I don't remember the bigger picture. I think he was just trying to talk about how we can help women, and
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly.
Interesting.
But yeah, if he's going to use it, it's got to be a mulieris dignitatem. If it's going to be something that's really a part of his core. Now, obviously, part of his core mission was to help women and to, broaden out an understanding of womanhood, to help bring order to it. But yeah, to the amount of energy that's been spent trying to mesh these two things together is just, it's an amazing thing to sort of look at.
So how do you, if you could sit down, I know that there are things out there that have the word Catholic and feminism is in the name of these groups.
Right.
Have you had any conversations with these people?
Obviously through print
while
more
you
than
answer,
anything.
I'm going to turn that heater up.
Back and forth. Just back and forth more through print. I think the other, the hard part is that it's kind of everywhere. It's been really accepted as just sort of the way in which womanhood needs to move forward. And again, I think it's a sort of feminist light thing where they really like the idea. And and I don't mean to imply that any of them are ill-intended. That's not it's just the ideas themselves. I think people don't really realize what they're dabbling in, what they're getting in, and what they're trying to actually mesh
by
together.
Feminism, whatever they mean by that, you might mean the same thing. It's just that's not what the word kind of means.
Right.
Or hasn't come to me. Is that
right?
Is that the main criticism? And then you're like, so why use a word that's so confusing at the very least?
Well, there's that. And then they would say, well, it's because we are trying to reach, we're trying to reach out to women who would be put off by Catholicism otherwise. Which I don't think that's actually very effective. I think it's gotten to the point where people are, feminism is so broken and people are so tired of it that there's an appeal in something else. But I think there is this kind of feminist light idea of women need to work. We need more government money so that we can have free childcare. We need the patriarchy is bad. There's still a sense of, and actually, the real challenging part about this is, what is it, 30 years now we've been trying to blend these two. Look what has happened to women in the church. This is my fundamental argument, is that it has just sown so much confusion because people don't know what are the things, and it varies from person to person. What are the things that you actually agree with in feminism, and what are the things with which you disagree with radical feminists? There's not really a way to, they can use all these different modifiers, but it's really not that clear to anybody on the outside unless you really ask. And most people will not tell you. It's not like, what I mean by feminism is this. I've never actually seen that in the arguments or engagements I've had with women about this. But the problem is that what's happened to Catholic women? How many Catholic women are aborting and contracepting? It's almost the exact same as the popular culture. There's about 1% to 2% difference between secular women and Catholic women. It's been completely ineffective in terms of helping women understand true womanhood, the importance of motherhood, the reality of vulnerability, the gift of vulnerability, and the gift of being able to serve others. So that is what I think is the real problem. It also, I think, doesn't have the capacity to really help fight for the pro-life position because it doesn't acknowledge that feminism is actually what's created the abortion issue on such a scale that we've got. And I actually, it's been really interesting because I was told, we shouldn't talk about feminism in the open because we'll lose all of these elections if we do. This has been an argument, I think, on pro-life side by a lot of people for decades, really. And then, of course, you look around and you're like, well, what elections are we winning with feminism by not attacking this, by letting this just fester and get worse? And to see what has happened after Roe with Dobbs, the big thing is we put so much energy into politics, very little energy into culture. and into helping women really understand what motherhood is. And I think that these are all sort of the fruits of trying to align ourselves too much with the popular culture on the question of feminism. And that's, it's hard to get out of that when this is what women have been told in the pews and whatnot. And the people that really know this, I mean, very few men actually want to engage in this conversation, which I think all my sympathy, like I wouldn't read this stuff if I didn't have to. Like, some of it's just so awful and painful. This is not fun research to do about feminist issues. So given that, and then given the fact that there's a lot of personalities that are really hard to deal with, given the fact that women will say things like, it's my way or the highway, or I'm pulling my kids out of your school, or I'm not donating this year. It's not hard to see how these ideas also just fester in parishes, because nobody wants to fight this on a local level too. So anyway, it's really challenging to deal with.
I'd love to hear your take on how society has changed such that men and women's jobs can kind of be interchangeable because they're quite cushy. They don't require a lot of manual labor.
Right.
If we took like 10 of your female friends and 10 of my male friends, and we all went to some forest somewhere and we had to survive,
right,
it would be very clear that the men would, whether they felt they were up for the task or not, they would be doing the harder labor, and the women wouldn't be. And it would be, there's something nice about knowing who's doing what.
Right.
Okay, but now we live in a day and age where, most of the jobs that most of my friends do, it's not actually hard labor. I mean, obviously the men are the ones doing that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of confuses things, especially as it comes along with women should be going out away from their husbands and away from their children. I guess those two things together, you've got the feminist trying to separate the woman from husband and child.
Right.
And increasingly it's the case that the job a man can do, the woman can also do that job.
Yeah, this was really apparent. We had an addition put on our home at one point, and it was absolutely fascinating to watch who showed up every morning. It's no women. There were no women other than when we were painting. And then, after months of men traipsing through this edition, which was, it was so fun to watch, and it was awesome. And my 2-year-old loved it. Like, he started sleeping with the measuring tape. I think at one point I found like 3 measuring tapes in his bed. Like, he just thought it was amazing. Then these women came and vacuumed the new carpet and cleaned the space. And it was just awesome. It was amazing. It was just incredible to see that. But yeah, those are the jobs that.
Same thing with us. We just had our roof replaced.
Yeah.
And the first day, a bunch of men and a few women showed up. The men were like working their asses off, sweating up in the sun. And the women were like wandering, picking things up off the ground that fell down.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. But like, why are we pretending that women are as capable as doing hard labor as men are, when they clearly aren't? And their existence depends in many cases on men doing the things men do.
Well, and you see this obviously in the military. It's been interesting. We live near Quantico, and my husband actually used to work on the base with the Marine Corps for a while. And so it's just wild watching, as the standards and the requirements are changed and lessened. And, firemen, I think, are the same way. Like, all of those standards are changed, which obviously begs the question, like, do you really want somebody that can't meet these standards to be next to you?
It's the same thing we just said about Disney. Yes, we do. We want to keep failing.
We really want that. Yeah. No, I think it's really, incredibly challenging. And that's, again, why it comes back to power. Like, we have to, and even this idea of, we've been telling women that they can do everything men can do, there's kind of grooming women to think of themselves as men.
And then we watch these TV shows where the women kick the men's ass.
Yeah, exactly. Over and over again.
Never. Would never happen.
Never happen.
This is why you need pepper spray, darling.
Yeah,
right? This is not ever going to happen.
Yeah. And but it ends up becoming this bizarre relationship where it's like, we want to be just like you, but we want you to change. This sort of schizophrenic dynamic of that. That's the angst, that because becomes about power. We want to control you now because now we're just like you and we can do the same things. So yeah, it's really wild when you start looking at. Just
from a sociological point of view, it's just interesting. Like, even if you take out like eternal souls and the fate of mankind out of it and just sit back and observe.
Right.
One thing I'm observing that I'd love your take on is how there's like a reaction to feminism now in a way that always also looks kind of awkward. You know, you've got the woman who is clearly filming herself making her pastries for the children, and maybe this is done with good intentions, and sometimes it just seems like LARPing, or it seems like, okay, how many hours are you spending away from your children so you can film yourself looking like a great traditional mother? Like, no kind of mother I know or that my wife hangs out with would think to like film themselves putting, you know, and I'm not demonizing it. I also think we have to have kind of compassion with both men and women who have been eviscerated, like everything's been blown up and we're all in shambles. To try to say, okay, we're trying to find the way of sanity again, and sometimes it looks awkward. But what's your take on that kind of
I think
conservative mum movement on Instagram?
I think it's really interesting in the sense of I have a lot of sympathy for it, because I feel like it didn't exist before. Like even women's fashions, it's amazing to be able to find long dresses now. Like for years, it was always like the mini skirt was the only thing, mini dress, you know, you couldn't find clothing like that. Like, so it feels like the pendulum is actually like, you can actually wear a long dress and not like weird anymore. You know, that I think that's a really big, amazing change that's happened, where you're still, you actually can be stylish again. So I think that the pendulum is swinging back the other direction. I think it's going to be awkward, because this is just what it is. And people see trends and they're like, I want 1 million followers. And so they're going to do things that they feel like are going to draw that. But I think there's also people who genuinely, that's their life, you know, like, anyway, I'm obviously not that person. I don't really even like social media. So I'm not good at social media. So it's not like something that I've thought a lot about, but I think that there's, and obviously Theology of Home, we're showing visually, we're trying to help people understand what it looks like to be a normal woman again, but not in a way that feels like we're just trying to get clicks. You know, it's a matter of how do we help women really start thinking about this deeply and in a healthy way, instead of just it being sensationalized, or the other problem is making it look like it's easy. I think that's the other piece, that, you know, there's nothing harder than being a mother, I would say. I've written 10 books, and it's much easier to write a book than it is to be a mom. And I'll bring this up. One of the points that was made against my book was that I talked about motherhood. This woman thought that it was infantilizing to tell women that they should be mothers, which, you know, I think tells you everything about
infantilizing to tell women to become mothers.
That motherhood is infantilizing.
How wild. It's like it's the polar opposite of infantilizing.
Yeah.
You're saying, stop being an infant. Care about other people.
Exactly. Get out of your own head. Yeah. And her argument was that it's better to call, it's better for a woman to call herself a primary caregiver. That was which is just wild too.
Primary caregiver day instead of Mother's Day.
Yeah. Which, you know, a lot of people just live with that. I recently heard a story about a man who was gay and had, he and his husband had a baby. Somehow got a surrogate and had a baby. And he hired a primary caregiver and, you know, thought everything was going to go well until, of course, the gardener's like, do you know the primary caregiver is just watching TV all day and neglecting your daughter? I mean, what a mess. He fired her, and then he was like, this is hard. I don't have a mom. Like, where do you get another I mean, obviously you can hire somebody, but that's devastating to a child who's only been attached to one person for 2 years.
It is funny, like
change it.
You know, I know of people, you know, who are quote unquote married to another dude, and they've got surrogates, and it's so bloody sad.
It's so sad.
It's so bloody sad, and you feel guilty saying it, right? Because you know that there are some men and women in these relationships who like have good intentions, and they love their children,
right?
But they're saying, my children do not need a mother.
Yeah, that's the
my children
crazy
actually
thing.
do not need a father.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Right.
Even in the quote unquote the conservative movement, you have people doing that.
No, it's incredible, and I think it just shows. Really, for 50 years, we haven't said anything good about motherhood as a culture. If you look at what has been there, and so that's what even this woman who was criticizing me for saying, you know, believing that it's infantilizing. Well, where's that coming from? That's coming from. It's coming from Betty Friedan, who's calling the home a comfortable concentration camp. It's coming from, you know, it's all this nonsense about how bad the home is. It's, you know, we're going to find our fulfillment in work, which of course is all from Marx and the communists. So it's it's incredible when you start looking around and seeing, has anybody said anything good? Where's it been? And you've got women obviously like Phyllis Schlafly, and there have been movements that have touched on it, but it's not been in popular culture really at all.
Motherhood.
Yeah, at all. It's very much considered, it's like something to sort of get through, or it's, it's like getting your driver's license. You can do it or not. Like there's no sense of this is who you are in the core, even as a child, that, little girls mother their babies all the time. Like there's something, and I think that's also back to that idea of what a good woman looks like, that she's not smothering. She's not a devouring mother. She's anticipating the needs of other people and trying to help them and help them become who God made them to be. She's trying to provide shelter for them emotionally, spiritually, physically, nourishment, all these different dynamics that we live in the home, but also are in her body. Those are elements that I think we just don't even think about, because we've been, again, so focused on how do we compete with men? How do we become like men? And that's why nobody can define womanhood, because we've cut out mother aspect. But even if you're not a biological mother, you're meant to be a spiritual mother. And this is, of course, the beauty of the church and the history of the church, is these incredible saints, these incredible women that have shown us how do you mother people as a woman, even without children. Well, there's this spiritual richness. There's the educational aspect between all the schools that nuns ran. There's the psychological element of mentoring people and helping them develop over time, all of that. So I think we've made motherhood something just biological, what was birthing people, instead of this is a whole dynamic of your personality that's built into your body and character and soul. All these pieces are meant to fit together instead of whatever it is that we think women are supposed to be today.
We idealize youth. And so, it's hard to know, where's my trajectory? Like, can I be the wise old man who, gives wisdom and calls forth the potential in younger men? And I'd love to hear about women and how they struggle with that. It would seem to me that what I look out, it was funny for me is like, you go to big cities, you don't see like the beautiful old woman. You go to like country town in Kansas and you do, you know?
Right.
They got the curly gray or slightly purple hair.
Right.
And they look like old women.
Right.
But it feels like that's unacceptable actually to be an old woman. So I'd love to get your take on the matriarch. What does that mean? And why isn't that a threat to patriarchy?
No, that's so interesting. I'm having flashes of, 16 candles. There's that grandma that's like, I'll open the donuts. She can't help out in the kitchen at all. She just has her cigarette. I'll open the donuts.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, well, good. You don't need to see it. But in any event, there's, I'm fascinated by this idea because in one of my books I wrote a very long time ago, I actually looked around. I was trying to find wise women because I found that I had all this resentment whenever I would go to the grocery store, because invariably there would be like an old woman behind me and she'd be sighing as I'm trying to get my kids into the cart. Like, these are the people that are supposed to be helping me. I didn't live near family. I didn't have close friends. It was really a time of deep isolation. And then to have the sighing and the pushback coming from people that I knew should know better, that should be able to help me, not be able to help me. So I started looking around, like, what does it look like? Where are these women? And it was kind of amazing because they were really hard to find. And I remember finally in the cry room, there was a woman who had just had a baby and her mom was with her. And I watched their interchange and I watched the way the grandmother was so attentive and she was helpful and thoughtful and anticipated. And I just went up in tears because I hadn't seen it. And I was so like, we need that. We need that kind of love that's unconditional and really gracious and thoughtful and, dialed into our specific needs. And so anyway, it was really beautiful to see like when you really see it in a woman who gets it, who knows how to serve others in a healthy, ordered, godlike way. There's something really beautiful about it. And I think there's also something really beautiful about whatever the relationship is with who her husband was or certainly in a religious woman, just I'm thinking of a religious woman who ran an order who was just deep suffering, but deep wisdom in her life and the things that she went through and she was able to accomplish with the order that she's helped found. You know, it's just incredible to see that. So yeah, I think that, you know, I talk about this idea of the matriarchy in a negative way in the Anti-Mary Exposed, because I think that's what's sort of taken over is this Gloria Steinem. You know, if you had to pick somebody today, she's probably the biggest matriarch. That, you know, she's in her 80s and still pushing for abortion, and, you know, meeting with Meghan Markle to talk about how they can fight for it after Roe, and, you know, all of that. And like there's something just that's not what a real matriarch does. And I think TV likes to make this caricature of, you know, that Christian woman who's trying to control everybody and manipulate everybody, and she's all about, you know, pulling the strings and whatnot. So yeah, I think there's a totally different reality, and that doesn't get highlighted anywhere. Maybe like Brideshead Revisited, the Lady Marchmain, is that her name?
That book keeps coming up. Everyone tells me to read it. I haven't read it.
You can watch the movie. It's easier.
Is it good?
It's actually quite well done. Jeremy Irons is really good in it. Yeah. So yeah, I think it would be amazing if we could bring back the matriarchy in an ordered way where people had a real esteem and respect for the grandmother, great grandmother in the family, and, you know, felt like they could go to her with problems because it's not your mom, you know. And my grandmother was like that in many respects. I was very close to her, and, you know, it's just really interesting to get her perspective on things. We didn't always agree, but it was just great to have that kind of a relationship with a woman who had seen a lot more than I had, and obviously loved me and cared about my well-being and whatnot. And I think those are the pieces that it feels like we're not connecting well.
I have this idea, which I haven't fleshed out. You know, you read fairy tales and traditional stories, and you've got like the strong young man and the gentle young woman. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that if they do their job right, you end up with the gentle old man and the strong old woman.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Right? Because if you've got like an angry man, a man who's still like exerting his authority when he's old.
Yeah,
and
something's
there's not
wrong
a
with
peace
that.
in it. Same if a woman who's old and she's too submissive, it's like something's gone wrong.
Yeah. Oh, I
so
love that.
too with the strong young woman. Like I think my wife, very choleric, you know. But I would say she would admit that the reason she was strong is it didn't come from a good place. It's because it was survival in a way.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
What do you think about that?
I'm going to be probably thinking about that for days. I think that's so interesting to think about. Because it goes back to that idea of temperaments. You know, the 4 temperaments, the older you get, the wiser you get. You're supposed to balance them out. It's not, you know, they're supposed to mellow out instead of becoming stronger in one. You take on all of them. So yeah, the choleric is really fascinating because that seems to be a very dominant one among women. And
that's my bride. She is like dictionary definition choleric. Wow. But you know what's interesting about her is she's not threatened by other people.
I don't see her that way though. That's so funny.
She's not that's what's interesting because you think choleric, you think this is someone who needs to get their way. My wife's really interesting because she really is, she's not threatened by other people, and she tends not to threaten other cholerics, because I'll meet some women, I'm like, oh gosh, here's a bit of a bulldozer, and they feel perfectly comfortable around my wife.
Yeah,
it is very interesting.
Oh, that's
I
so
think
interesting.
it's more, she has this thing where I love talking about my wife on my podcast. Isn't that funny? She's not here to defend herself, but she just needs to understand why we're doing something. And I used to take that as, would you get
like
off
you're
my
challenging
freaking
me.
case here?
Right.
And it really is not that. She's like, no, I don't understand. Like, and I'm like, oh, it's this. Oh, okay. And it took me so long to realize she just wanted to know.
Yeah.
Or if we're in a group setting, she needs to know like kind of who's in charge, and do they deserve to be?
Right.
Because if not, I'm happy to take over.
Wow.
It's beautiful. She's lovely.
Yeah. No, I really love that image though of, you know, you can imagine very easily that older couple, like the dear older man, and then
Yeah, who's kind of
one.
gentle, and
Yeah.
he kind of doesn't discipline the kids like the grandkids, like maybe the way he should.
Yeah,
But
right.
the woman's kind of like yelling at the kids, or
Yeah.
she's kind of.
Right.
That's they get the man with his newspaper, and he's not checked out in this
Right.
imagined scenario. Like he's fully engaged, but
Right.
there's a tenderness to him.
Right.
But if he hasn't done his job right, if he
Right.
hasn't submitted to life,
Then the edge is still going to be
then
there.
there's just this piss and vinegar
That's
still, you know?
That's really interesting. Yeah. I think, especially the woman side, I think of too, of just, we knew this woman whom I grew up with that was just adorable, but she had this closet, like that was the present closet. Like one year my brother got, and we didn't know that it was there, that she had it, but in fact, it may not have even existed, but it was my brother's birthday and he was like 6 or something. And she was like, oh, I've got something for you. And she came back in minutes and she had this wrapped present. It was like a pink piggy bank or something. It was something that was totally not suited. Not, like a thoughtful person would not get him that. But it was just so precious. Like she was ready, you know, I mean.
Who was this?
She was a family friend. Yeah. But she was definitely in her 70s and had tons of grandchildren and probably just always felt like, I just need like a cachet of wrapped gifts for whenever it's somebody's.
I see what you mean.
You know, but it's just that,
Yeah.
I think it's that kind of thoughtfulness. You know, there's another grandmother I know. She was actually featured in Theology of Home too. And she's got SCAD. Well, she had 9 kids and then she has like 72 grandchildren. And then now the great grandchildren are coming. But she's like, she goes to thrift stores and finds birthday gifts for everybody throughout the month. Like that's what she does, is it's like figuring out like good gifts for everybody, which I just thought was so thoughtful. And, you know, she's obviously retired and elderly and, you know, she's got time to do that, but it's that kind of thoughtfulness that she knows all of them well and she can find something that's suitable for all of them too. So yeah, between that and, you know, just women feeding people, especially when they're older, it's big meals, I think, are really special. Just creating
How do women
space.
encourage women not to suck? Because men do it pretty bloody directly.
Oh yeah, it's so hard.
Grow a pair. You know, you'll have men on
Yeah.
stages or men at churches giving men, and I'm not saying women should talk like that to women. I'm actually
Right.
asking you. I've
Right.
got a couple of ideas and I want
Yeah.
to run them by you.
Yeah.
You know, because if the man says like, I just don't feel like I have what's, you know, within me to like protect my family.
Right.
No one would be like, well, you don't have to. They'd be like, well, figure it out.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
If a woman says, I just not really like tender towards kids, I don't know really how to cook. Well, freaking read a cookbook and figure it out.
Yeah.
Like if a man doesn't know how to defend his family and feels awkward about it, it's like, do it awkwardly. That's okay. Just do it.
Just start
and
to
it
thinking
seems
about
to
it.
me that women need to be told to be womanly, whether or not they find it easy. But I understand, I think, that there is something too about you need to understand yourself as a beloved daughter. Like you need to accept that there's a sense in which you have to accept yourself. There's a sense in which you've sent parts of yourself into exile. You know, like I understand that as well.
Right.
And so maybe it really is a matter of like men hear things different than women and respond differently. Yet nonetheless, should women be challenging women that directly? What does it look like?
I love this point. This idea of like, if a man's a bad man, a bad dad or something, we kind of judge him. We're like, step up, like what's wrong with you? But we don't do that with women. So I think that's a really amazing point. You know, aside from that, the theological, I think the biggest thing we don't realize is just how much women are influenced by women around them, culture and the culture around them. And this is why it's been so devastating that Catholics have really gotten out of the culture. I might have mentioned this before, but in 1946, I think it is, the Song of Bernadette won like 2 or 3 Academy Awards. Like imagine the Song of Bernadette even being made today. But we just had a sense of how Catholicism had to be in the culture. Movies were still made. And now, you know, things are coming around, but very little has been focused on women. And I think, you know, much like deep detriment, because this is how women absorb content, is through by other women, you know, obviously influencers. That's growing, another area that's growing. But when I was researching the Anti-Marriage Exposed, that was the thing that just came up over and over again, was fashion magazines, that the power that they had, and Oprah Winfrey, the power that she had, Because women like to be kind of brought along with something. They don't want to be told. They want to see it and be attracted to it and move into that.
That's beautiful. That's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. And that's, this has been kind of our mindset with Theology of Home, is it's the opposite of these, hard-hitting books that I'm writing that are difficult to get through. This is like the honey. Like, we've got to draw women in through something that's really beautiful and compelling, that speaks to them on a much deeper way, that they can then start implementing incrementally in their lives in very subtle ways. And it's just really challenging because it can't be done poorly. Like, it's, we know when women have a sense of like, oh, that's just kind of cringy, when it comes to cultural stuff. It has to be done in a way that feels authentic, and it feels like it's moving within kind of the spirit of the age, but taking the good parts of it. And so you can't like decorate a room and have it just be like totally out of style stuff. Like, it's just not going to work. Women are going to pick up on that. So anyway, we've obviously at Theology of Home have been excited to see a lot of interest in our work. We also, this idea of a lifestyle, presenting a lifestyle people, is now getting a lot of attention. I know there's at least 3 major publications that are adding lifestyle sections to their newspapers or their blogs or whatever. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they do it, because we obviously started with nothing. I mean, we've been like a shoestring organization for a very long time.
Tell people what this, I know we've circled around this. What's Theology of Home, and where do they find it?
Theology of Home is, it first started out as a blog that I started because I realized that there were all these things I wanted to talk about in the Catholic faith that nobody was talking about, like an apothecary in Rome that I love that goes back to the 14th century Dominicans. There was a church in South Dakota that I saw. I went and spoke out there, and I saw this church. It was just this gem of a brand new church, a little chapel. It was baptism gifts. It was all these kinds of things that I was like, nobody is talking about these things in the church. And
it smells good.
That's a good sign. And so it just started out with that idea. And then we realized the idea of the name Theology of Home, that there's the home itself is meant to be a foretaste of heaven. The home is meant to get us to heaven. It's meant to be, there are elements in the home that mimic the church, but also mimic heaven, whether it's things like light, comfort, safety, nourishment, all of that. Those are all part and parcel of the home, and we can say them about our parish, and then obviously heaven. These transcendentals exist. And so anyway, obviously I don't use the language of transcendentals in the book. It's a lot more fundamental, it's more direct than that. But that's really where the book and the blog, and then of course we have a lifestyle brand. We have candles and products and sell books and things like that. So all of those things have just slowly and incrementally kind of come together over the last 6 or 7 years. And, we're continuing to grow, and sort of at that choke point of like, do we scale up, or how's this going to look? But that, I think, is what women are really responding to, is it's not just this sort of navel gazing about like women in the church. It's a lot bigger than that. It's the things that help, they're tools of life, and the things that we want in our homes, the ways that we can make our homes better for the people around us. So, and that's the great thing about the lifestyle idea in general, is it's food, it's home, it's travel, it's products, all of that.
What I love about what you're saying, I think it goes back to what I asked just a moment ago about how do women challenge women, how do men challenge men, how is it different? I think it's something like this, right? The only thing, I think this is a fact, the only thing that can conquer a desire is a stronger one.
Yeah.
So if I have a desire for pornography, what could possibly be stronger than that, you might think? Well, it's a man's desire to love properly, maybe.
Right.
Not shame, that won't do it. My desire to not be shamed is not greater than my stronger to look at pornography, something like that. And I think what you're trying to do is like you're giving them a vision, and you're saying there's something better.
Yeah.
And you've been lied to, and you know that there should be something more. You sense it, and you're right. And here it is.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, I think
Can
that
I
is
cut
it.
that out and just use that for our commercial?
Don't you think, like, appealing to desire?
Yeah. No, and
really.
this is the thing, is that, I grew up actually in a very sarcastic family. Like
Yeah.
it was just that kind of our natural way in
Yeah.
which we all engage with each other. And I had to really like get rid of that. And I've had to be really conscientious about it's not what I want. I don't want people to feel shame. I don't want people to feel like
Embarrassed or
right. Or feel like we're unapproachable and we don't care about them. Like and I think that's what people sense about our brand and what it is that we're trying to offer is we want you to have a richness in your life. And, it's amazing. Actually, a couple of months ago, I went on a retreat. My husband was out of town with my sons and my daughters who are older were home. And it was like the first time where I was really could kind of carve out some time to just spend all day in prayer for several days. And this strangest thing happened. So I got this like barrage of emails that like, unlike I'd ever gotten any other time, things will trickle in, but it was just this really amazing kind of response of the Holy Spirit, just women saying, my mom was an alcoholic and I just never learned how to take care of my home. And you guys are teaching me how to do that. And, there's just, it's subtle and it's little and it's attractive and compelling and it fits into people's daily lives in a way that's, you don't have to carve out a huge amount of time to read our blog in the morning or, you can pick and choose what you like, but it's that kind of stuff that we're hearing, women being encouraged in the life that they want to lead. And a lot of times it's even ways that they didn't even realize that they wanted to lead. Another woman I know has gone from being very lukewarm Catholic to, suddenly she's not lukewarm anymore. Just these little changes where you can start absorbing the faith, I think, in different ways. And that's what our products do. This is what we try to do with our writing. We have started creating these guides for different seasons. We have a beautiful one, Christmas guide, Thanksgiving guide, Advent guide. Anyway, it's how do we help people really dig into this in a way that they're compelled by instead of.
I think that's
shame.
what I'm moving over to this side fully now. Like the way you approach a person in pain is with compassion.
Yeah.
You don't actually hit them over the head or shame them. You don't say, suck it up, buttercup. In fact, the only reason a man appreciates that talk is when he believes the man saying that to him believes
really
he
cares.
has what it takes. So it actually is a form of love.
Yeah.
Like if you're just berating me, I hate you.
Mm-hmm.
But if I say to you like, you come beside someone and say, hey, like it's not your fault actually. Like you didn't like, I like to think of it in regards to pornography because that seems to be how men were in my generation. We were just like born into this world and then porn was everywhere. And it was, it's like, you didn't ask to be born into a pornified world. Like that, you didn't choose that. And in fact, the first time you were exposed to it, that probably wasn't something you sought out. It was sort of thrust upon you and you didn't really know what you saw. And you were aroused and excited and maybe scared, but all that's completely normal and right to feel.
Right.
But okay, now we're here and now it's not working. Well, what should we do?
Yeah.
And I think it's something similar with feminism. Hey, like to say to women, like, it's not your fault.
Right.
Like you were born into this world where motherhood was demonized and
work was made the idol.
Yeah.
I think that's.
And so of course you believe that. Yeah. And of course you're angry and frustrated and maybe like you're older and you didn't have kids or you're kind of right to be angry, but like what do we do now?
Yeah.
And so this goes back to your like, here's the vision.
Yeah.
Something could be,
No, and I think that's kind of the amazing thing too is just encountering women who have, even women who are, are single and beyond childbearing years. Like how do they rectify that? And obviously there's a whole spiritual element of that, but that doesn't, their life isn't a waste. There's so much, so many of the gifts and things that they've acquired can be used in different ways. But it is really that recognition of we didn't choose to be awful women. Women in America didn't choose to be awful women. Now the choices that we make exacerbate it, but even that is all coming from the culture. So how do we start offering a culture that offers a totally different vision that's people want and inspires them? So
who else is doing good work in this area? Is it permeating every kind of female outreach? I think in a way it is.
Actually, it's really interesting.
I can't think of Catholic ministries to women that aren't talking about the beauty of motherhood, but maybe right.
Yeah, I think I think what our difference has been is just not being so focused, especially on the spiritual life per se, because that feels like that's where the rub has been. But there, Catholic women in business are doing more of this. Walking Purpose is expanding more a lot. Word on Fire has just added a women's formation thing. So
Oh, that's wonderful.
And they actually just added a children's cookbook, which was really great to see, because I think that's another piece of the puzzle. Sophia Press is trying to do better with women's.
Who are?
Sophia Press.
Okay.
Obviously Ignatius is doing women here and there with Catholic All Year is great. Catholic Vote is just adding they're one of the ones that's adding a lifestyle section. National Catholic Register is adding one, and our Sunday Visitor. Our Sunday Visitor has had a site called Radiant for a long time, and that was very, lavender with soft toned images and whatnot, which is nice. But I think it just felt very narrow in its scope, and they're seeming that what I've been told is that they're expanding out to more lifestyle, which includes recipes and stuff. And actually, it's been really interesting. I've been friends with Kevin Knight, who runs New Advent for a long time. And for the longest time, it was just Catholic stuff that he would post. And now he'll post crazy things, like things that are kind of content. Like, I don't even know what I've seen on there. But we do kind of quirky stuff from around the world. And he'll do, things like the world's deepest ocean rift or something. I don't know. Just things that that don't fit neatly into Catholic categories. So it's been fun to see that sort of broaden out, like that these things are absolutely compatible with our faith, and they create wonder and interest. And so why are we not doing more of this instead of just the very narrow, apologetics or something?
I want to ask you a question, and then I want to get 2 questions from our local supporters. But I'd love to ask your advice. What should young men look for as they date women? What kind of attributes or virtues should they try to find that let them know, okay, this is a woman worth, none of us are worth anything in a way, but like this is a woman I could marry. I remember someone kind of giving advice to a woman saying, see how he treats other women. Like, see how he treats women who have nothing to offer him. Like, how does he talk to the waitress? And I like that.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting.
What might be advice for a young man?
It's funny. Actually, my husband and I went out to dinner last night, and normally I'm always the one that can hear the conversations going on around us, and it's not intentional. But
I know, I'm like you. I hate that so much. I wish I could just
Could I just
focus.
turn this off?
Yeah.
Well, last night there was a couple behind us who was on a first date.
Okay.
And my husband could hear everything because the girl's head was right behind him. And it was so, just from sociological perspective, it was so interesting because they were both, I think he was MD and she was a PA or something. I'm not really sure, but both medical backgrounds and, all this chatter about that. But in the meantime, here's this woman, she's really beautiful, and he was very attractive. And, at one point, he says, well, what are your goals in life? And she's like, I don't really have any. I had all these goals in school, and now that school's over, I don't really know what I want to do with my, it was, and obviously it's a first date, so maybe she's not ready to divulge something, but it was at least an hour in, and the conversation had been going well, and he's already said, he would love to have a family and whatnot. But I think it's just that recognition of motherhood, in terms of that being a reality. I think that's something to obviously look for. There's obviously so many other red flags. One of the things that I have seen so much of this year, and I think maybe it's just one of those things, I'm seeing more of it because it's on my mind, but just the narcissist piece. Is this someone who's thoughtful? Is this someone who can respond when the needs of other people around her are she can help with? I think that's something very basic. And obviously narcissists can do that in a way that makes them look good. But I think it is probably that kind of that same point of what is it? And this actually is Max Shaler has this great line about how motherhood is something where it mimics the love of God because it goes from the greater reaches down to the lesser. And I think that has to be something that happens in a way that's not self-serving. If you can see that attribute, that obviously goes a long way.
Yeah, this sounds so cliche.
So maybe it's your
This sounds so cliche, but like kindness toward children. Like if you're with a woman,
even knowing what to do with
and
them.
yeah, exactly. You know, like she stops and she like
Right.
caring about things in my vicinity, and then a woman of depth. You know, like a woman who's interesting.
Yeah. And that's what was so fascinating about this date last night was I kept waiting for something interesting to come out. And, you know, there was nothing memorable. You know, there was clearly no depth in this woman that it was, as she was talking, I just thought, like, this is just got to be exhausting to try and just carry this conversation.
It's like
when you
trying
can't-
to blow on a fire that has gone out, and you're trying to ignite
That's
something,
a really
and you're
good
like, there's
image.
nothing there. It's
Right.
just ash. Sorry, I don't mean to be too harsh
No.
on this poor woman, but I do
No,
remember
well-
having this conversation with a particular woman on an airplane once. She was sitting next to me, and we got into this conversation. People don't do that anymore because, fair enough, I don't want to either.
Right.
But so what do you look forward to? And just travel and stuff. And it was just hopeless. There was nothing there. There was
Right.
just, I'm like, what do you love? What do you?
Right.
Nothing. It was just
Right.
brutal.
And, you know, obviously the other piece is like, can she read a book? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, like that seems like it may seem.
How's that for a low standard? 2024. Can she read a book? And by that, I mean, can she read a book? Like, would she actually sit
Right.
through one? Does she have the...
Right. And well, the sad thing is though that I was thinking like something nonfiction, but now I'm even sort of like maybe it just should be fiction because you know.
Fiction's beautiful. Does she like fairy tales? Does she appreciate fairy tales? I love fairy tales.
Well, I was thinking more like
I get
Danielle
it.
Steele
I
or
get
something,
it.
you
I
know.
get
But
it. Yeah.
I think, I think the depth is a really important piece. I think that, yeah. No, I don't envy people right now. It's really got to be so hard.
Yeah.
So hard dating.
G'day, fellas. For over a decade, I've spoken to men around the world about the battles we face: temptation, apathy, anger, and the struggle to find meaning. Now, let me tell you, one of the most powerful tools I've seen for breaking free and growing closer to Jesus Christ is Exodus 90. The Exodus 90 Challenge begins this year on January 20th, but this isn't just a 90-day program. Exodus 90 is a spirituality for men in modern times built on three ancient pillars: prayer, self-sacrifice, and fraternity. We all long for something more, and that something is to be found in becoming the men that God created us to be, sons of a loving Father. It's time to turn away from our idols. It's time to break free from the pharaohs that hold us in bondage. If you're ready to make a fresh start and embark on a journey to uncommon freedom in Jesus Christ, then download the Exodus 90 app today. This is your chance to break free, refocus, and rediscover who God is calling you to be in the new year. We start January 20, 2025. So go to exodus90.com/Matt to learn more about Exodus 90. That's exodus90.com/Matt to join tens of thousands of men from all around the world for Exodus 90 starting Monday, January 20th. Well, hey, everybody who's watching right now, thank you so much for watching. If you would consider becoming an annual supporter of Pints with Aquinas, as you start drinking your booze, we will send you a free Pints with Aquinas beer stein. If you become an annual supporter, there it is right there. It's gorgeous. Where you'll get these interviews 1 week before they hit YouTube. You'll get exclusive streams from moi. We have courses. It's a beautiful community, and you'd be helping us pay the bills and helping us pay the people who help put this together. And it's, it isn't cheap. So thank you for considering. mattfradd.locals.com. And so here are some questions from our local supporters. Now, I haven't read these ahead of time, so I can't vouch for them. I don't know these people. But what did feminism get right, asks Boss Man.
I think feminism picked up on an idea already within Catholicism that women are equal in dignity to men. And I guess the big question is, what do you mean by feminism? But I pretty much would be very hard pressed to actually say that it has gotten much right.
Is it kind of like, is it
It's
sort
like
of
saying
like
what did communism get right?
Yeah.
You know, it's
well,
that.
like, what did Robin DiAngelo get right? Nothing that Catholicism didn't already teach me.
Yeah,
Namely,
I think
racism bad.
Yeah,
That kind of thing.
no, I think that's well said. I will say too, the other thing that's been actually what's been really interesting about the Catholic criticism, though, is that some of the Catholic feminists have been trying to present this idea of Catholic feminism as sort of a middle way between radical feminism and people like me that they call anti-feminists. But the crazy thing is that you wouldn't say that it doesn't, nobody says that about socialism. Like we're socialist Catholics, so we're sort of this middle way between communism and Catholicism. So and that's why I like to sort of bracket it in a bigger picture. Like it's not that we're not just talking about this very narrow concept of feminism. We're talking about the male and the female mirror again of that, that bad divorce that's going on, where it's about power and control. And that's what feminism gets wrong, is trying to make everything about power and control instead of love and charity.
Yeah, I can see how these Catholic groups try to use feminism as a sort of shock tactic to show how kind of cool or edgy or open we are.
Yeah.
I could imagine someone also being like, that's why a church might fly the rainbow flag. We're a welcoming place. It's like, yeah, but that's not what that flag means. Like that flag means debauchery that has no right to be in civil society.
Yeah.
So stop it.
Yeah.
Stop using confusing language. Don't say you're a gay Catholic. Yeah, but like it's like, yeah, but words matter.
Yeah.
But I can understand.
Yeah.
I can definitely understand why people do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get the appeal.
Right.
And
Yeah,
maybe I'm misunderstanding the appeal, and if you're watching and disagree with me, let me know below. But
no, but I think there's the sense of, people want to find ways to evangelize and to build bridges. And I think that that's really important. But the way to do it is to not water down what your own message is, or to try to mix it with something that fundamentally, like the bigger question is, what is feminism bringing to Catholicism? Like that's the question that I want to ask. Like, what else you got that it's bringing,
if nothing,
right, exactly. Then
thank you, but no thank you.
We don't need this. Yeah. So I think that's the bigger thing that we have to start. That's a place to start.
I think what it is, male brutality toward women is horrific.
Yeah.
I know females can be brutal towards men, but you don't see it in the same way. It's not immediate. There's not like black eyes and rape when women are brutal towards men. Maybe there are in black
I think
eyes,
there's probably more of it than.
But when as a man, if I think of a man hurting a woman, I want to hurt him. I want him to be castrated. I want all sorts of bad things upon him. I think men are rightly horrified when men abuse their power to hurt women. We're horrified by it, which I think is, if you want to give men the benefit of the doubt who go in on feminism, it's this like, yeah, okay, I'm on your side. That's what they're trying to do.
Right.
And maybe they say that in a manipulative way too. I know that, but I think in the beginning,
exist.
what is female? What is female brutality, or is that not the word? Manipulation or
I think female manipulation is
that how it's used? Because
it doesn't go away. I mean, it's a triangulate. It's character assassination. That's what women do. They try to destroy your character, and that obviously we know is not great either. But I don't think that this is the myth, is that feminism was addressing that, but that's not. It's actually perpetuated it. It's created worse problems because, why don't we tell women to not be in monogamous relationships? Somehow that's going to fix the problem, because now they're hooking up with all these people and
who don't care about them.
Yeah, exactly. Like somehow,
3 hours.
Right. Yeah. If you're lucky. Yeah. So I think that's that's one of the myths. I think also, another myth is education and work. Well, all of those things are happening already, partially because of the Industrial Revolution. People had money to be able to pay for not just sons to go to school, but daughters. You also have all the technology that arose at this time, the fact washing machines and dishwashers and all of those things created the room. Like, I think a lot of times, like, what if I didn't have this washing machine? Like, how much time would I spend washing 7 people's clothes all day long? Just the amount of work that went into that. I know actually I had a friend in Poland that her children were allergic to the one kind of detergent that they could use in Poland. And so she had to boil all of her diapers so that she had clean diapers, because there were no disposable diapers. But that was like an all day thing for this mom with 2 small children to do. Her husband was on a ship captain. Anyway, it's those kinds of small things that don't factor into it that I think feminism gets credit for all these things that weren't actually a result of feminism. It was really, the classic history answer was the rise of the middle class, and it was new technologies, and it was just a restructuring of things that, not entirely, but I think that to say that, women's degrees and this is actually another piece of pushback that I get all the time, like, how dare you, you have an advanced degree, how dare you, be upset with feminism because you would never have gotten it without it. But again, those things were on the rise for sure.
Yes, indeed.
And we didn't need to destroy all of our culture in order to get those things.
All right.
I like this stuff.
Julius, I feel like I need to drink with you because I can't just let you do this on your own. I don't have a glass.
That's very kind of you. You're just going to drink it straight out. I know I should have brought you one.
Just drink it out of the bottle, yeah.
Get you one.
Julius asks, how do you convince feminists or even just regular women who grew up in the feminist era that believing in traditional gender roles and biblical marriage does not mean you hate women? Perhaps it's not possible because feminism doesn't allow for that view.
Yeah, that's the real problem with the patriarchy piece. And this is where you've got to go around again, either on the emotional level or what's happening, or even pointing out, like, why are women not happier? Why is this not working for them? And I think there's also a lot of massaging has to be done to explain what the biblical view is, because the left has not only been able to determine what they want women to be, but they've also been able to determine in the public eye what biblical women look like. It's a Handmaid's Tale. It's genius that they came up with that vision, that model, because they show up and, it's highly effective way of communicating in one image that this is what happens when you have a biblical view. You're going to end up in a fertility cult, without any kind of a will. Like, what could be more opposed to this idea of freedom and savvy women with jobs that get paid a lot and get to wear cool jewelry and clothing and, all of that. So that's really where we also have work to do, is this false dichotomy that we've created has to be the truth of it, of what womanhood looks like. That woman at Whole Foods,
that's right,
has to be promoted more.
Yeah, if it wasn't creepy, it was. So I would have loved to go ask her about who she is. Like,
right,
who are you?
Right,
like, where did you come from?
Right, exactly. How
like
did you get here?
Just walked out of a fairy tale.
Yeah.
John Alex Ball says, what is the most absurd example of feminism and the manosphere coming to the same conclusions, horseshoe theory style?
I don't understand that question. Can you?
Well, we mentioned it earlier, the sort of the polar extremes. What feminism and the manosphere, that seems like it's completely opposite. That they actually come to similar conclusions, namely,
that women
doing away with the spouse and children. Oh.
Yeah.
They both, in a way, say that.
Right. So I think, is that the answer?
Yep.
Right.
What is, Teddles says, what is equity in the eyes of feminism? Has the equality feminists sought to achieve evolved through the years? If so, how?
Yeah, this is the thing, is there's, again, you just put a different word in front of feminism, equity, feminism, reactionary feminism, difference feminism. Like, there's all these different things that mean very different things to different people. And so, again, it would be really helpful if people would be like, I'm a blah, blah, blah feminist. And by that, I mean X, Y, and Z. But of course, nobody wants to do that because most people aren't obsessed with definitions the way that philosophers are. So, I think that equity feminism, that, that idea that women are the same as men, still certainly exists and is wildly popular. And a lot of people have that kind of built into their minds, especially if you watch the media, ads and things like that, you can see it pretty easily. But that's not the only one that's around. And that's, again, what makes it hard to defeat, because you're dealing with all these different variables that kind of operate off of one center idea.
Katie Did It says, I used to belong to a fundamentalist Protestant Christian wives group where so many of the women were being abused by their husbands. Most of the women ended up divorced and became feminists. These women were fully anti-feminism until the men in their lives abused them. Their only escape and ability to survive was in the arms of feminism. How can anti-feminist women survive without feminism when dealing with husbands or fathers who refuse to live up to God's calling for them?
Well, I think feminism is an ideology. It's not a survival tactic. It's not a way. It's not it's not a harbor. There obviously, and in fact, actually, I think it just exacerbates things, because what it does is says, well, see, of course, this is what men do. They're awful. It doesn't recognize, like, these are sinful men that behave this way in a way that is not befitting of them, and it's not befitting of you. And so it's not calling out what the real problem is. It's just basically like, it's basically just trying to turn, again, all that anger that they have from this and sort of keep fueling that by saying all men are like this. And so the anti-feminist position obviously has the capacity to really bring healing by, I mean, it's obvious, especially if you're Catholic, by having resources, understanding the nature of forgiveness and sin, and what real manhood ought to look like, what ordered family life ought to look like. So these are not new things. Feminism isn't actually healing. It's just providing a place where you might feel sort of a kindred community, but it's not bringing healing. It's just bringing sort of a consolation of people that have maybe been through your experience. It could be somewhat helpful, but it's not going to get you to a place where you can be restored.
This is a good question. Catholic Viking says, do you think there can be another wave of feminism? Or is the pendulum swinging back towards more traditional ideas of gender roles? If there is another wave, like, what does that look like?
Yeah,
Great question.
What else could they do? I think the pendulum is swinging. The one big issue is, it's been fascinating to watch, is the women's vote, because I've been watching this really closely. I'm kind of fascinated by just how lockstep. I mean, it's this idea of tribalism. It's this idea of fashion and fads, and what are my girlfriends doing, and so I'm going to do the same thing that they're doing. And but it feels like, and that's kind of the scary thing, is men were motivated to vote in this last election. It's usually 10 million more women vote than men.
What was it this time?
I think it was less. I haven't looked at the number. But we know that the male vote counted for a lot. And so anyway, I think that it feels like the pendulum is swinging, and it's swinging because people are just talking about it now. Like, I'm amazed at how many places that will have discussions about this on conservative media. It gets a ton more attention than it ever did. People are, more books are being published on it. People are really talking about it. I know there's a woman named Lisa Bevere. I'm going to say her name wrong because I want to pronounce it the Italian way, Bevere. But she's written a book called Fight for Female, and she's New York Times bestselling author. And Lila Rose put us in touch with each other, and it's been great. She said, your book gave me the courage to write this book, because she felt like she had sort of the intellectual argument to be able to make the point that we really are fighting for women. It's been a very pointed attack on women. And in some ways it's like my anti-Mary book, but it's from a Protestant perspective and reaching a totally different audience. So, I thanked her for writing a book I didn't have to write now. Yeah. But I think word is getting out, and men in particular are feeling capable of writing articles about it now, whereas you just didn't see men talking about feminism in the past.
This is a good question. Titus Toos says, is a burqa degrading? Or does it help keep men chaste and value women more? Interested in a feminist/conservative take on this.
Yeah.
I think it's disgusting.
Yeah.
I think it treats men like animals.
Well, there's obviously that. The only interesting take I've heard about a burqa was by a woman who lived in Afghanistan. And she said the reason for the burqa there was because people would kidnap women because they needed new brides, and it was just a way to get women. And so if you wore a burqa, you were hiding who you were. So they didn't know if they were getting a young woman or old woman. You just had to guess anyway.
Damn it.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
I know. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of the fascinating thing, is we've got these two, again, back to these extremes. You've got the burqa where the female body has to be completely enshrouded. And then on the other end, you've got women who are practically naked, all but naked, in the culture on the left. And so it's this pendulum. And I think this is, we have to get this right in the sense of, and we know how to get this right. It's not these extremes where we're afraid of one or think that liberation is and its opposite.
Yeah, it's weird too because like you can always push modesty, quote unquote, to like an absurd extreme. Like I think the burqa is actually too flamboyant. You can still see the semblance of a shape where the head and the neck meet. I don't like that.
Box.
Let's do a box, and then and then the box will just remind me of women, and then that.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, women are their brother's keepers, it turns out. So if you dress sexually provocative, like you are responsible in part for the sin of the men. I think so. Christopher West disagrees with me here. But I think if a woman dresses like a whore, and I know that sounds like I'm being aggressive for no good reason, but I actually mean it. Like if I'm driving down the road, like I was in Switzerland recently, there were whores there, and you knew they were because of how they dressed. All right, so that's my point. Like, if you dress like that, and everything about how you're standing and wearing and is inviting sexual response, energy. You are in part. I mean, Thomas Aquinas says this. He actually says it's a woman who does this is like someone who digs a pit and covers it over and leads to the man's destruction. Now, let me balance it out by saying that men aren't irrational beasts and men should have custody of their eyes. And the difference between a boy and a man, presumably, is at least in part the man can govern his passions. He's not governed by them. So I'm not saying that if a woman is to dress provocatively, it gives the man license to lust. But it doesn't bloody help. And I think she is partly responsible for it. But correct me if you think I'm wrong.
No, I think it's really interesting. I have a good friend who talks about I think he calls it the bikini effect or something like this, where he says, when a woman is wearing a bikini, she may think that she's communicating one thing, but there's something that she is communicating.
Yeah.
And I think the real challenge too is that you've got, it goes back to, again, like, where's the dad in it? Like, I've been at church at times where there's a family there and the daughter, like the family brings up the gifts and the daughter's skirt is so low that she can't actually bow to God for the gifts because she'll be exposed. But some of that just comes from, again, the Gen X boomer moms who are like, oh, she's so beautiful and doesn't she look great? Like they're sort of living through their daughter's.
It's also the simp dad. Here we go. Could be this, right?
So
who doesn't want to displease his wife.
Exactly. So
doesn't want to put his foot down.
Right. And so I think that is another piece because he should be the one that's like, I'm sorry, you just look like a prostitute right now. Like this is not helping anyone. And, how do we navigate this? This is, and more importantly, if this is how you're getting your attention, then we have a real problem with this situation. You need to figure out where your, what dignity is and how you get it and what kind of reaction you're going to get from people, because this is not the kind of attention that you want to be eliciting. So
I love Jason Everett's idea that we veil what demands the reverence. We don't veil things because they're ugly. You think of a bride on her wedding day, she may be veiled. And when the husband or the groom lifts the veil, he's not like, oh gosh. You like think of the Blessed Sacrament. We don't just put it on the altar or in the pews.
Just throw it up there.
We veil it and it's locked. And even then there's a curtain and even then it's in like the golden dish thing. I'm pretty sure that's the technical name. And why? It's because it's the most sacred thing on the planet, and we should veil what is beautiful. And I think that language is, because of the work of John Paul II, Christopher West and these fellows, I think it is permeating kind of Catholic culture to talk more like that.
It's come a long way.
Yeah, like your body's beautiful. Like that's why we veil it.
Right. And I think that is just why it's so important for parents to sort of figure that out. And, for the mom to not be like, oh, she's, she just looks great in it, and encouraging that, not realizing. Anyway, and it's not obviously always generated by the mom. It's hard too, because what's available. It's the other piece.
I'll go out on a limb here, maybe because of the whiskey, but like most people aren't beautiful. I know I just said everyone's beautiful, but what I mean by beautiful is like that picturesque model. Like most of us aren't.
Right.
Exhibit A, all right? I get it. And so actually what happens is when women dress really immodestly, like sometimes it's disgusting.
Yeah. There's that.
Or it's just like, ugh, it's off-putting. And it's like that, no. The body is an interesting thing. It's both beautiful and not terribly beautiful. Well, there's a reason that married couples turn the lights down when they come together. Oh, no, but you know what? That I'm going to say the opposite to that now. I think it's so they can see more. What I mean is, there's a mystery to the one flesh union. It's not like septic and clinical. It's like I want you, the man says to his wife. And it's the same reason chapels should be dark. There's a mystery there that cannot be seen with the lights on. The lights actually, I'm talking out of my ass now. I don't know. I think I'm grasping at something that I know is there and I can't yet get it because I'm not smart enough. But like when you walk into a chapel that's dark, you sense the mystery. If it had fluoros, the mystery's gone. And it's something about, there's something here. But in order to see it, quote unquote, I have to have it dark. Something like that, I think, in the one flesh union. What do you think? Good luck.
Tackle that one. I love a candlelit chapel. I think that I actually wanted to get married when it was dark, and we couldn't logistically pull it off because I just think there's something so much you can focus on it. So I'm going to follow you down that road and just think about it, but I don't feel like I've thought enough to.
I clearly hadn't before I started speaking, but it's my podcast and everyone has to endure it.
No, but there's lighting is lighting too.
The first point I was trying to make is like sometimes immodesty doesn't mean you look good.
Yes, yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. No, I
like
think
sometimes
that's exactly
it's quite
right.
off-putting.
Super off-putting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Call me old-fashioned, but I think a woman's short should be lower than her vagina. That's what I'm trying to get
you're
at.
Old-fashioned.
As opposed to feminism, see, this is interesting. We've already addressed this, cigars and roses, and I'm glad we did. As opposed to feminism, what is the best response to female abuse? Christianity. That's the answer. That's what we just said.
It's totally
right?
the answer.
It's like, what does feminism bring?
That has the pieces through which you can actually bring care when you have a mother and father in a healthy dynamic, raising a child, and obviously broader community and whatnot. That's where the protection comes from. And actually, this is one of the questions I have for you, because I did a podcast a few weeks ago that we were talking about. Someone was saying, what can fathers? The interviewer was asking me, what can fathers do? And of course, I was like,
for their daughters.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's like, what about the shotgun? Like, how do we protect our daughter? You know. Anyway, but he was saying that there's a lot of men that feel shame because they know that they're engaged in pornography, and so then they feel like a hypocrite to be telling their daughters what to do. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that.
Well, pornography is wicked and it emasculates men, and if we have to drive a bloody nail through the heart of that, and this is an episode to discuss how to do that. Strive21.com for those interested is a course I put together. It's not a silver bullet, but it might be the beginning of something. But, like a hypocrite isn't someone who doesn't live up to what they know is right. Like a hypocrite is somebody who demands something of everybody else that he doesn't demand of himself. Yeah. So like if a man knows pornography is evil and is doing everything he can, let's say, or to be free of it, and then he falls occasionally, but he's teaching his son it's evil, that he's not a hypocrite. He's just he's a weak man, or he's a sinner. That's, like if priests could only preach the virtues that they practice perfectly, they wouldn't preach at all.
Right. And that's obviously a much more ideal situation. But this guy was saying that they don't try to protect their daughters at all because they feel like it would be hypocritical.
Yeah, so that's stupid.
It's much deeper.
That's just stupid.
And it's I just had never thought about it. So I thought it was really interesting to think.
So the fella's saying like, look, I can't tell them to do that because of what I secretly engage in. So who am I?
Right.
It's like, yeah, you're their bloody father and you're weak and you're an idiot. But you're not so much hopefully you're not so much of an idiot that you think that your sexual failings give you permission to not father your daughter the way that you should. But you might be.
So what do you think fathers can do to protect their daughters?
From what?
From feminism and from the free
marry
love
a good wife. Marry a good wife. Because my wife, she's so good and she really helps the kids. She really helps the girls, even just little things. Like I'm going to say the least impressive things about my wife. Like even like she realizes like putting makeup on every day probably isn't a good show of a sign for my children. You know, like she's also very tender towards babies, and she encourages the girls to do that who naturally love babies.
Right.
She's kind to them. How do I do it though? Yeah, I think I'm okay being the do not wear that. I'm okay being that, and my wife being the kind of softer, helping me understand things. Maybe. Also, here's something I think fathers should. This has been interesting for me as my daughters and sons have gotten older, is to not, and I'd love your take on this as a woman, to not remove my physical affection from them as they age. You know, because when your kid's 6 and you're wrestling with her,
Right.
that's one thing.
Yeah.
When she's 15, it's like men feel awkward about this, and sometimes kind of is a little awkward for whatever. Yeah.
Right.
But I've really tried to make an effort to.
That's really dear.
Does that make sense? Like, 'cause I love my daughters. My gosh, I love them. They're so funny. They're just beautiful and interesting. And
but I think that there's
I don't
something
wanna
important in
remove my
that. The
affection
physical
from them.
contact is
Yeah.
really, there's something,
I just love hugging them.
yeah.
Also, you
All
know,
that
I'm sure this is
oxytocin.
cliche, but like affirming your children. I try. Like, I'm big in words of affirmation, and so I'm always like, oh my gosh, you're so pretty. But I try to be more than that. I try to be more like you're very funny. Like, I just like being around you. Like,
That's awesome.
you're a good,
But then it makes it feel more authentic and helpful when you actually do say, like, maybe you shouldn't wear that, or take that, or you should wear something else.
yeah,
You know,
well,
because
since I have my children's heart,
right.
like my daughters, they want my approval
Yeah.
because they love me. And so when I say something they don't want to hear, even if they get
Right.
upset by it,
They're
still
still
feel
going
it.
to respond. Right.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's
Tough to
hard. I don't
raise.
like giving parenting advice because my kids haven't grown up yet.
Yeah.
And even
it's
if they
really
do
hard.
fall and crash and burn, that's not a sign we did anything wrong either. It's hard, isn't
Mm-hmm.
it? Parenting advice. Children are so different. The other thing too is like marriages are so different.
Yeah.
That's what I worry about too, right? As we come out of this fog of what men and women are, we got no freaking clue.
Yeah.
The fear is that we go the other direction and we say men can only be like this and
Yeah,
women can
yeah.
only be like this. And then
Yeah.
we kind of shame men and women. Like we shame the man who likes poetry or
Yeah.
the theater, and we shame the woman who likes to hunt.
Yeah. That's really.
So I think we got to be really careful with that when we talk about how men and women ought to look or how marriages ought to look, because I've never met a woman like my wife, and I'm sure she's never met a man like me. And so to look at another couple and go, you should be exactly like that, or
Yeah.
what do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. There's all kinds of all those quirks and different experiences. And, my husband and I got married when we were much older. And so there was in a lot of ways it was harder because we already had habits and things that we had gotten into in our lives. But on the other hand, it was easier because we already had lived for ourselves. We'd already, we joke about how we spent our retirement in our 30s and 40s because we were both traveling and living abroad and things like that. And now, my husband may never retire because we have a 4-year-old and he's 60, it's kind of remarkable. But, so I think that, and even that, is kind of amazing. Like we have 15 down to 5 kids and we're old, that's a very different dynamic than if we're in our 30s and even the funny thing is just even parenting, like we put our son in preschool for a while and it didn't really last. He didn't like it. And I was like, I just can't get excited about these. Like I don't want to go to the farm right now. Like this isn't what I signed up for. Not that I didn't want to spend time with him, but it was just also, there were so many other dynamics that I just didn't want to get involved in. And I've already done this 4 times, it's just a very different experience being, an older mom than when I was a younger mom. So yeah, I think that trying to keep those things and those variables in account, and also, but with a shared vision. I mean, my husband and I both work a lot, and I think we both wish we didn't spend as much time working, and we were trying to mitigate some of that. But it just means all the more that we have a shared vision and goal that we want our family to understand the value of work. And, this is very unique to us. I think it was something important in our parents, in our families with our parents, but it's not everybody has this ideal of like teaching their kids how to work at 9 years old. So yeah, I think recognizing those differences and what the priorities are, and
Someone
it's really
told me,
challenging.
don't compare your inside to somebody else's outside.
Yeah, that's genius.
And that's
actually.
true of your life. It's also true of your marriage.
Well, and you also see a lot of times the outside of other people isn't really what's going on in the inside.
That's precisely
there too.
precisely the point.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
And,
so
and I
different.
remember my spiritual father, I asked him a question about having to do with my marriage, and he said something like, there's enough in your marriage to teach you this. Like, in other words, it's almost like it's
Right.
its own world. Like if you walk into a wall, you'll stop doing that. Like, yeah. And I don't know. I do get a little worried sometimes that maybe men who are so allergic to feminists maybe want to demand something of them. Like, you could see a man being like, I need you to be, I'm exaggerating, okay, but I need you to be bloody sewing and, friggin' making the breakfast from scratch. And it's like, well, that's easy for you to say, but you stream on Twitch. Like, so maybe if you were like hunting and like we were eating all, this is my story. My mate, John Henry, who I've already mentioned, I was at his house one day and his wife and children were away. He's like, can you run that for me? He didn't know how to run his dishwasher.
That is hysterical.
But here's why it's okay. He kills everything they eat.
Wow.
Like he hunts it, guts it, feeds his family.
Yeah.
Good. That's all right. But if you're going to like walk around in your pajamas all day and stream on YouTube and then demand that your wife
keep working,
like that she should exist like a creature from the 1920s, that seems.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many men are doing that. I'm just
Yeah,
I'm trying to say what are
I
the
think
extremes?
actually it's probably more the opposite. I mean, this is the other thing that everybody encounters is, all women are recovering from feminism in one form or another. But the other one, the tough one is just the overly demanding wife in a lot of respects. Just the, and actually this is one of the things that Jordan Peterson and I were talking about too, was just, somehow it works because someone is in charge. But, there's something to be said for back to purpose, not power. This idea of the mutual submission that people make is because they're not trying to be powered. They're not trying to be one over the other. But the purpose of the man often is the responsibility that then has a responsibility to lead as a husband. And when a woman dominates, it's very difficult. In fact, years ago, I used to take communion to this woman who was dying of something, but she was still lucid enough to tell me all the stories about how she married a lemon. I can't tell you how many times I heard about this husband that she had that was married a lemon. She married a lemon, and she'd tell me all the things that she would do, and he just ended up in the bar. And I was like, I think after, initially I had sympathy for her, but then like the more I heard about this lemon of a husband, I was like, I'd probably be in the bar too. Like just the way that she spoke to him and, talked down to him and just, probably verbally abused him. So I think there's something about, Paul talking about women being submissive to their husbands isn't what women typically think it means. It's because women are incredibly capable, because women can do things, but it has to be, we have to learn how to put that in the right ordering. And again, it's going to vary with couples and temperaments and personalities and life experiences and family of origin and all of that. But if we're really demanding and or crushing their spirit, there's no respect there. There's no, we're constantly nagging. In fact, at one point, a couple of years ago, my spiritual director was during the lockdowns, and there was something my husband needed to do, and he wasn't doing it. And, it was just such a strange time for everybody, but we just had a baby too. So there was a lot going on. And my spiritual director said, just let him fail. And at the time I was like, that's so genius. Because,
let him fail.
Yeah. He said, let him fail. Like, you don't need to keep nagging him. You need to stop asking and pestering him about this. And at the time I thought, okay, well, he owns it. Like, I thought it was genius for him. And then suddenly I realized it was genius for me because it shut me up. I stopped bothering him about it. And eventually he took care of it. He didn't fail, but I had to give him the space to do that. And that obviously was our own relationship and our own dynamic. And I'm saying that will work for everybody. But I think that it's those kinds of places where we have to be conscientious of, are we nagging? Are we belittling our husbands? Are we trying to dominate the relationship or even drive the family, the way the family operates and functions without their input and judgment. And I think this is actually much worse in Europe. I was just talking, again, this woman, Hannah Speer, that I was talking to, she was saying there's all these generations of men who, you know, they're third or fourth generation. Their dads never took any responsibility and the moms were always in charge, and they're all these stay-at-home dads walking the prams around, which it's fine. That's going to happen on certain occasions in certain situations. But when it's like the whole city,
That's bizarre.
it's really wild. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
But none of these men, they all saw their moms work. They didn't, you know, this was their experience. And so that's just kind of what they learned. But they don't have any kind of real responsibility, you know, for the family itself.
yeah, it is this might be a nice gut check for the women watching, you know, because I think often women ask things of their husbands and they're like upset maybe that he wouldn't do it, but they bristle if the husband asks them.
Yeah.
Hey, when I get home, if you could have dinner ready and make sure the kids are bathed.
Right. It's again that double standard of we have these expectations of men
That's
need to
something,
comply
yeah.
with versus
It's a good thing to ask. Again, I think we have to direct these things to ourselves because we've gotten nowhere by just blaming the other.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And, you know, dealing with, if you have a strong personality, how do you integrate that in a way where both people feel respected and ordered and cared for and loved and seen instead of like obeyed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So we can
where do
answer
people follow
everything.
you? Where do they read your ruminations on feminism?
Oh,
and
goodness.
The like?
Well, Theology of Home is the best place. We usually always post.
.com?
Theologyofhome.com. Yeah. So I'm publishing kind of all over: Washington Examiner, Federalist, American Spectator, National Catholic Register, the Catholic Thing, et cetera, et cetera. But that all gets put on theologyofhome.com or carriegress.com at the moment.
Yeah, Did you think when you started writing that this sounds like this is going to be your life's work?
Oh my goodness. I didn't even know I could write until I was in my 30s. I hated writing. I was not good at it. And then I miraculously got a job as a journalist in Italy. And I had a very patient teacher, editor. I would write something and it would just come back covered in red. And I just thought, what am I doing this? And then I had to finish my PhD. So I had to write a dissertation. And all of that work as a journalist just totally paid off because I was able to crank that book out, 300,000
But
words.
I mean this work specifically
No.
of feminism. You probably had no idea that
No, not only that.
this is what you'd be known for.
I said I would never write on women when I was in graduate school. And, but, you know, part of it was because I just thought it was so dry. It was so boring. It was so unintelligible. And it was so non-communicable. I couldn't tell, like I wasn't going to take these academic books on women and give them to friends or family, or like, it felt like such an insular topic that wasn't making its way out into the culture. And so I think that's affected a lot of, you know, my writing style is very non-academic style. Theology of Home is very non-academic. And so no, I never thought this would be a topic I would be working on.
I want to highly recommend your book, The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us, especially for those who are like, gosh, I need my wife to read this book, or I need my sister or my daughter or my mother to read this book. The reason you should get this book by Carrie Gress is that it comes alongside the woman with compassion and just gently shows her why feminism has been detrimental to her. That's why they should get this book. It's non-threatening. It's not like so.
Well, thanks for the plug.
Yeah, cheers. What'd you say?
Thanks for the plug.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for what you did, and thank you so much for traveling. I know traveling is such a pain in the butt, so I appreciate you coming out.
No, well, great to be here. I look forward to seeing the Florida studio one of
me
these
too.
days.
Thank you. It's always awkward to end. It's like at some point right now it's ending.